Chapter 191, Frigid Winter. Even the longest and darkest of nights would end, and no matter how cold the winter was, there would always be the spring, where life would be restored. Yet sometimes, the morning following a long, dark night would bring not hope but despair. A snow-covered world wasn't always as beautiful as it sounded, it instead made the frozen corpses even more frightening to behold. When the first rays of dawn burst through the skies, the people who had been fighting through the entire, difficult night noticed that it had finally reached a conclusion. The few who had survived to witness the dawn were definitely lucky enough to be called favored by fate. With the Beastmen army not caring about sacrifices and insanely sending more reinforcements, the inner city district had already been lost, and all of the defending human armies had retreated to the final third defense line, which consisted of temporary defensive structures crafted from sandbags and earthen walls. It was also the last lifeline of this city. The catapults outside the city had already stopped firing. In front of such a long distance, the catapults wouldn't be able to maintain their accuracy, and the restoration of the light and the halting of the snow caused the Beastmen's air cavalry to fly into the blue sky once more. It seemed that the Beastmen had their victory in the bag, but the current Beastman King Ammon Bloodox didn't have any joy at being on the edge of victory. His face, instead, was incredibly fatigued. "We've lost over 70% of our warriors, and countless are seriously injured. Only 2 of the major tribe leaders have returned, and they're both gravely injured as well." Among the others, Omar lost his life in the previous castle siege, and now, Fox King Wen, Wolf King Sostillo, and Bear King Lond have all died in battle. Kagura has disappeared, most likely also. Each wave of bad news increased the burden on Ammon, but nobody could blame him. The stump of his severed arm, which had been cut off right at the shoulder, was still bleeding. Ammon was severely injured from having lost an arm. As the leader of all the other tribe leaders, he didn't avoid the battlefield. The reason that he was able to survive, apart from his outstanding personal combat capabilities, was more reliant on luck. No matter what generation it was, cruel guerrilla warfare battles in cities were the most fatal and dangerous of all. Legend rank warriors could die at any moment in such chaotic battles, and a single sudden surprise arrow or flying rock could kill off a saint-ranked mage. The pitch-black night and the pounding snow all over added to the chaos and increased the likelihood of such events occurring. "We finally made it to morning." Ammon's sigh caused all the survivors to nod in agreement. During the battle of last night, the unlucky had died before even knowing what happened, while the slightly luckier had at least seen their opponents before dying under their swords. The sly and clever Fox tribe leader Wen was the classic example of an unlucky person. He had been killed by a stray catapult shot from his own side, and 2 of his personal bodyguards had died along with him, creating a scene that was simply unbearable to look at. Yet actually, without them realizing it, the Beastmen, who had lost themselves in the fervor of battle, had broken one of the most critical maxims of castle sieges, to never force your opponent to the brink of no retreat. Surrounding the enemy on 3 sides and leaving one side open as a path of escape was a tactic in this world as well. Giving the opponent a chance to escape would also mean that your own armies wouldn't be forced to the brink. Fighting against people who had given up was undesirable, as they would furiously fight to their deaths or at least take you down with them. On that night, the blizzard and the surrounding Beastmen had blocked off all avenues of escape, giving the humans nowhere to retreat. And when they had no chance of escaping with their lives, even a cornered mouse could defeat a cat, so how could those trained military soldiers possibly allow themselves to die worthlessly without fighting back? "If we can't escape death in the end, then we have to at least die like warriors. We must take an enemy with us as we die." The allied human armies, who were forced to the edge, exploded with incredible combat potential as their fear of the falling of the castle walls transformed into hatred for their mortal enemies. Their spirits, which didn't fear dying together with their enemies, coupled with the terrain advantage of the city, finally started changing the rate of losses on both sides, making the Beastmen suffer significant casualties. Amelia's flower garden of death, named Humility, was the rear support. It acted as a death trap again and again, and the sudden ambushes from human warriors within the houses succeeded in killing many Beastmen. What happened to the Bear King Lond wasn't the first example, nor was it the last. But the Beastmen's rear support had already stopped arriving. When the night turned pitch black and the combat situation became chaotic, Their roughshod siege weapons turned into massive killing machines that wouldn't separate friend from foe. No matter in any generation, dying via friendly fire was one of the most unacceptable methods of death to anyone. Large-scale hexes and combat magic. If they tried using these in a situation where they couldn't even see 10 meters in front of them, then there was a 50% chance that they would kill their own armies. And the most fatal was always that life-stealing winter chill which imperceptibly crept upon them. In this damned weather where any drop of water would freeze instantly, any cut in their anti-cold weather clothing was fatal. And this wasn't even mentioning any injuries. The freezing cold numbed the warrior's sense of pain, and although those easily unnoticed small injuries wouldn't become infected in the freezing cold, losing blood and energy because of those tiny injuries would end up being the most fatal of all. There were far too many beastmen who didn't notice their own injuries and ended up collapsing and dying due to them. When the beastmen forced the northern human allied armies to the brink, the beastmen also thrust themselves to the edge. The long lists of the deceased were shocking to look at. Every family had lost some members with the serious amounts of injuries and deaths, and probably over 70% of the tribes would need to undergo restructuring after the war. Even their current losses were enough for the beastmen to have basically lost in their goal of returning to their original homeland. Even if they won in the end, they would need several generations to rest and recover. But if Ammon and the other beastmen were given a choice right now, even if they knew about the unacceptable number of losses beforehand, they would probably still make the same decision. Victory is before us. Defeat them, and we shall be the new masters of the Northlands. With what they viewed as victory right before them, how could the beastmen possibly give up? But their current goal of becoming the masters of the Northlands would have been laughed at as lacking willpower and courage 3 months ago. After all, back then, the beastmen had fully been intending to conquer all the way back to their homeland and take the war to San Antonio. Without them realizing it, the cruel reality had woken the beastmen up, and their current combat goal was only to conquer the entire Northlands. The current beastmen no longer had the willpower to say that they could conquer all the human countries. Only the poor-seeming northern countries and San Antonio's reinforcements had forced them to such a degree. This caused them to lose the courage to fight against the human mega-empires. Of course, there was still some misunderstanding here. After this battle, perhaps each country would have to reevaluate the Northland's combat strength, especially the astonishing performance of the East Mist communal country in this war. Perhaps even military analysts with the highest standards would no longer dare to call the East Mist communal country a weak country. Princess Nitren, the new generation of magic swordsmen and the 4 elemental sword casters, the large self-destructing Roland Titan mechas, the floating airship Borealis, and the cleaner of the battlefield known as Drain King. All these new concepts and technologies would definitely help the Mist Kingdom rise to its former status in the Northlands. Military might also represent a diplomatic power. After their solid performance in this war, Roland's alliance of the Mist was also pushed one step to actualization. And on another level, when the news about the veteran Earth Elemental God Imr Lorcan being killed off in his own home turf started spreading, this familiar name of Roland Mist started drawing attention after remaining unnoticed for several hundred years. Of course, they had to first get past this obstacle before them. The beastmen are coming again, aren't they? I could see my own breath in the chilly air as I casually swung my sacred sword around to flick off the blood drops from it. This indestructible sword could basically clean itself. For the northern allied armies that had been struggling all night, the sky's lightning and the snow stopping were both bad news. This would mean that the beastmen could reorganize themselves again, and those damned air cavalry and siege weapons would be usable. While the humans might be able to have a temporary reprieve, the beastmen would surely come again with a destructive force for a final battle. The movable medium-sized catapults were slowly pushed into the city, as the bloodied elite beastmen soldiers that had survived over 100 battles treated their own injuries and watched their surroundings with a high degree of vigilance. Even the wind blowing some old tattered curtains would cause these veteran soldiers that had survived the bloody night to chuck their spears. And right now, the Allied Army's General Commander Black Bear Ansela was right behind me. Or perhaps I should say he was lying on the ground not far behind me. Beastmen knew more than just to rush in head on, but the Cat tribe's assassins had found the general command center and had ambushed Anslow. Even though he received assistance in time and managed to luckily survive, the one-eyed general had become completely blind. After receiving 3 stabs to the right side of his stomach, he was seriously injured to the extent that he was no longer even able to stand. But luckily for him, he no longer needed to give any particular commands. The only thing he needed to do was shout a single word with all his might. Defend. Defend. We have no path of retreat. If you want to live, the only way is to kill all these barbaric beasts. Defend. There's only injured soldiers, the elderly, the widows, and the young behind us. Defend. If we lose this battle, our country isn't even prepared for war, they'll lose their territory. Our families will also get involved in this endless warfare. Yep, defend. With the battle proceeding to this point, no tactics or arrangements of any kind were necessary any longer, resolute willpower was all that was needed. Defend. If a street block was lost, the next street block was already prepared with a new defense line. A temporary defense wall was knocked over. The next wall had already been constructed. A squad was slaughtered, and there was an opening in their defense line. The elderly and women that had been ordinary citizens just a moment ago picked up the weapons laying on the ground and filled the gap without saying a word. Perhaps it's the end of humanity and we will be defeated. But you barbaric beasts, you want to conquer this city and have a path to every northern country? You'll have to wring every last drop of blood out of each warrior in this city first. The young humans with tense expressions didn't say much, but they used their actions instead to tell those proud and arrogant beastmen just what the northerners and the people of the mist were like. The frigid winter is here, but us northerners have long been used to such winters. Even the coldest winter isn't that difficult for us. Just tolerate it for a little while, hug each other for warmth, and play with our doggies. Won't spring come right after? Even though he was now blind, Anslow was making dirty jokes as always. The doggies in his joke earlier was actually referring to something perverted, and judging by the loud guffaws coming from the warriors, everyone understood what he meant. When the sun finally rose slightly, the arriving sounds of footsteps and catapult wheels seemed to proclaim that the final battle was coming. At this moment, even I had nothing else I could do. I had used every one of my cards. Aunt Yuan was too far from here to be of any help. I had used Annie's squad to block those dark elves. I couldn't control Ziyuo's forces to begin with, and I had used all of my newly developed war weapons. I had no more moves I could make. That damned Imradalorcan. If it wasn't for him, Imradalorcan's final attack had indeed hit us in our weak spot. If Red Maple Castle fell, then there would be nothing I could do. Sigh, if only the battle could take 10 extra days. But there were no ifs on the battlefield. Innumerable famous generals had met their demise in the past due to what ifs, as accidents and misfortunes were the favored companions of failure. There was only a small difference between who went to heaven and hell. I supported myself against the Roland sacred sword and stood up again. Ever since Ren had left us unexpectedly, I had temporarily taken over her mid-level commanding position, but by now, I had already used up both the remaining summons of my sacred sword for today but still couldn't overturn the situation. My diligence and temperance have both died, those damned moon elves. Only they can have such a disgusting control over nature. The green-haired witch wasn't doing all that good either. She had used up all her mana in this battle, and 2 of her treasured 7 virtues. Well, she had only created 3 up to now, had died in battle, leaving only humility alive. It seemed that she was at her limits as well. Moon elves were the priest-type tribe of the elf kingdom to begin with, and they excelled at communicating with the gods and even true gods, borrowing their powers to use various high-level divine arts. And since the moon elves' original guardian god was the forest god, the nature priests who had used the forest god's divine magic for thousands of years naturally excelled in planting and controlling forests. It was only to be expected that eradicating unnatural plants was in the nature of their job. That was why Amelia had met her natural counter against a nature priest like Adrian and suffered greatly. Senior Amelia. Her typically neat hair was now messy, and her eyes were filled with bloody red streaks. The witch who hadn't slept all night was now even scarier looking than before. If the Beastmen come up here again, go ahead and leave. I don't believe that you have no way to escape. I can leave any time I want, of course, but what about you? Don't tell me you intend to be like a certain idiot knight and die together with the city. Me? I'm the indestructible Roland, how could I possibly die here? HMPH, I'm the super willful witch of Tempest emotions. How could I possibly listen to your orders? I'm really feeling like giving it my all against those barbaric beasts today. Hey, you think that I'm garbage without my summoned pets? I shall allow you to witness the greatness of a melee combat grandpa mage like me. From this angle, Amelia with her sleeves rolled up really did seem like that hot-headed senior from long ago, but I shook my head and decided not to say anything. Elisa? Harlois has finished her preparations, but she told me to tell you to not use it unless you absolutely have to, or else all your efforts will have been wasted. I did prepare one final trump card. The only magic I had which could overturn the situation from the utter edge was the highest level forbidden undead magic spell, Undead Calamity. But if I used this mega forbidden spell that every country on the continent had banned, all the corpses around here would transform into brainless low-level undead, which would be something completely different from when I had summoned the dead previously. Back then, the ones that answered my summons were those who were unwilling to remain silent in death, but the ones under the control of Undead Calamity would forever become brainless, bloodthirsty undead. This was a forceful and eternal servitude that was utterly disrespectful to all warriors. Perhaps all the warriors on my side would instantly change their attitudes towards me and attack me as an evil necromancer. The moment I used this spell, then the saying that undead doesn't equal evil would no longer apply to me, and perhaps my Mist Alliance plan would go kaput, and the East Mist communal country would then be viewed as a new hub of evil and will be isolated diplomatically. At that time, even if we won the war, we would have lost more than we gained. Anything is better than completely being destroyed. If all these people die here, then there truly will be no more hope. Hearing these words from me, Elisa merely adjusted her eyeglasses without saying anything, but judging from her downcast expression, she seemed rather displeased and spiritless. What's the matter? Why aren't you asking me if I can escape or not? Why aren't you trying to convince me to leave? Okay, Elisa, who was pouting as she complained, was actually rather cute. Of course, she didn't want to escape by herself. She was merely complaining about not receiving any attention or care. At the very least, Roland was still Elisa's boyfriend in name. I shook my head. According to my understanding of Elisa, I wouldn't have to waste time telling her about such things. Why are you asking? Didn't you tell me that you would follow me whether it be to the river Styx or to hell? What? Are you regretting it? Just as I finished speaking, it was as if dark storm clouds had suddenly cleared as she smiled ever so sweetly. Of course not, I'll never regret it. Then, let us fight alongside each other to the death. I'll pick your corpse up from the river Styx. The abnormal conversation sounded somewhat illogical, but it may actually happen. Perhaps the emotional relationship between the undead was just that strange after all. Seeing her emotions turn sunny again, I secretly wiped my sweat. But looking at how Amelia was evidently unhappy and feeling Elisa's eyes staring at my back, I suddenly realized that perhaps my luck with women was finally changing. Was I really starting to become a winner in life? But why was it that I only started getting luckier when I was almost about to die? Was I the type of person who was fated to shout, after this battle, I'm going to get married in my hometown and then die right away? Hey, I don't want beautiful women to only confess at my funeral as they cried and admitted that they liked me. But the familiar footsteps from not far away interrupted my thoughts. The final battle was upon us. The most surprising part was that the person leading the way wasn't a beastman, it was, instead, a familiar figure. That long, slender physique and light footsteps could only belong to an elf. Adrian. Yes, even though he transformed into a grey blood elf, even though the years had left their mark on his body, I would never forget his familiar face. After all, back then, this arrogant elf species lover who would never admit he was wrong was one of the ones who had given me the final blow. But at this moment, this cheap brother of mine didn't seem so well, as two axe-wielding beastmen were holding onto him. Adrian kept muttering to himself as if he intended to do something. Convince us to surrender? Is that even worth their time? This guess seemed reasonable. But there could only be one master of the Northlands, and the grudge between us now ran so deep that it could only be washed away by fresh blood. Trying to convince us to surrender was impossible from the very start. But I shouted out in shock when I read the Beastmen's lips and noticed what Adrian was trying to do. Hurry, kill him. Yet in the sky, a dark, divine light was already descending as the forbidden ritual finished its final phase. Those Beastmen had said, "It's time to prove your worth, elf." And Adrian had only said 2 words in response: God's Descent. Chapter 192, God's Descent. What is a god? There was no way to actually answer this question, since this colorful world contained too many existences known as gods that really did reach the level of gods in the eyes of people. However, in actual fact, gods consisted of many varying levels. The elemental gods, the true gods of order, the evil gods of chaos, the original gods, and the others. They had all created their own organizations, and everything about their abilities and personalities was different. Not a single person could give an exact definition of a god, and even the veteran demons in the Chaos Abyss were able to become gods, recruit believers, and bestow divine powers upon their followers. And, to tell the truth, there were quite a few major demons that did this, and their believers usually hid in the shadows. Those dangerous demon worshippers were usually at the top of the most wanted lists. As a matter of fact, there was actually more information on the Order gods, the victors of the previous Holy War. From a certain standpoint, since Lorsai was an exiled Order god, she was still similar to a true god of Order, as she had her own divine country and teachings, and she even protected the Dark Elf species. In order to understand these undying existences, one would first need to understand the differences between the true gods of Order and the other gods. Most true gods of Orders had a direct connection with a particular divine task, and their existences were representations of certain concepts. First, gods should never be treated as individuals. Yet while they were indeed high above mortals and would never nationally die, they had quite a few limitations as well. They were on a divine plane, but their main bodies were also trapped in the divine plane. They combined with their divine tasks and concepts and became incredibly powerful, but, because of this, they were partially assimilated by the concepts and had lost their senses of self. The side of Order was orderly, after all, and their god system was like a tree with many branches and leaves, with all the gods being a part of the overall tree, and each divine obligation and god had various connections with each other. Low gods, middle gods, high gods, main gods. This was only a rough separation of their ranks, but in a way, it was indeed the current situation of this world tree. If each main god were said to be at the top of the divine tree, then the strongest gods would be the tree's branches, and the countless souls and their worship that could be seen down the ladder constituted the source of nutrition supporting this tree. From a certain perspective, Lorsai was still the same elf Order god from before. She was creating her own world tree so that she could become an actual main god of the elves, and her first step in accomplishing her goal was to construct the Dark Elf gods, with the poison god Felix being the first. After they became a part of the world tree and lost a part of their self-consciousness, these gods could be considered to no longer be individuals. The closest analogy to their existences would be a country. Each god had their own divine country, which was the combination of a concept and group benefits, and these gods would obtain the powers of administration. However, they were also tied down by the very same administrator powers. Leaving their own divine countries, that was strongly forbidden, and as long as the gods did not leave their divine countries, it would be impossible for them to truly perish. If their physical bodies that they sent out were killed off, then the only thing that would happen would be some loss of divine power. And now that the elemental tide wasn't very active in the current generation, the gods' physical bodies were rather limited in power, and perhaps a semi-god level physical body would be able to deal with normal situations. But when faced with veteran semi-gods who had been through hundreds of battles, they would typically end up as part of their enemies' experiments on researching divine power. Yet in order to allow their guardian god to truly be able to assist them, the ancient elf kingdom, in this aspect, at least, was far more advanced than other kingdoms. God's Descent. There were certain standards to be fulfilled for a true god to perfectly accept a body as a vessel. The body needed to be customized, and their soul's wavelength needed to be adjusted in order to adhere to the true god's soul's wavelength. This way, the true god could use a power close to their maximum. If a god's descent succeeded, and the true God's will perfectly aligned with the vessel's, then its willpower and soul would transform into strength. And if the alignment ratio was over 90%, then with the vessel and will combining into one, the true God's host would be able to wield power far surpassing that of a God's physical body, and their combat strength would be almost at the level of a true God. It was worth mentioning, however, that God's descent was a double-edged sword. This soul contained much of the God's power, and if this vessel, which contained pure willpower and force, ended up being killed, then the true God's divine power would take a huge blow. If that God was only a weak God to begin with, then there was a high chance of the God directly perishing. The forest guardian god Clairladen had personally descended with his semi-god descendant as his vessel and had indeed managed to draw out tremendous power. He had even managed to force Lorsai into descending into her main physical body, but it was precisely because of this that Clairladen had met his end when his vessel semi-god Prescott died. These requirements were incredibly high, especially regarding the willpower of the original vessel. And, of course, the closer the person was to the god, the better. If there was a bloodline relation or a synchronized soul wavelength, then it would be all the better. In a way, Carwin's descent was the Chaos Abyss version of a god's descent, and it worked almost exactly the same as that of true gods of order. But there were also professionals at summoning the gods into themselves, and the human witches in the far west, the soul shamans of the Beastmen, and the Moon Elves' soul priests all had bodies specialized for gods' descents. Among these groups, the Moon Elves had the oldest traditions. The Moon Elves had always been the tribe of priests, which was an important role in the Elf Kingdom. Throughout the great history of the Elf Kingdom, the greatest priests would always come from the Moon Elf tribe. Their innate body structures were the most suitable for communicating directly with the gods, and their high-level divine arts that borrowed divine power aligned with their racial talent to begin with. And after Adrian had joined Lorsai, the Spider Queen had unhesitatingly designated him as a feature vessel for the poison god Felix. Amelia had also been countered all the way up until now because she had been facing against Adrian, who had been borrowing the poison god's divine power that naturally countered her plans. God's descent. With Adrian's muttering, a dark black light fell down from the skies, and a mysterious black mist trapped itself around Adrian. Abnormal magical runes appeared on Adrian's skin and caused him to moan in pain as he knelt to the ground, but all the human spears and arrows tossed in his direction were blocked by an invisible barrier. Poison god Felix. The already corroding ground around him was evidence of the identity of the descending god. It was the lucky god who had recently just ascended. Felix, who had been born as a dark elf, had long since reached the pinnacle of a semi-god. When Lorsai had helped him still the forest guardian god's divinity, a change had occurred in his divine obligation superscript 1 of planting and guarding forests, which then combined with the poison assassin Felix's original body's specialties and transformed the obligation into that of the poison god. Yet I didn't even need the sight before me to confirm my opponent because my system wouldn't possibly remain idle at such a critical time. Epic quest. Slaying a god. Quest description: kill the poison god Felix, and make the foolish Lorsai taste the feeling of losing her children again. Let her know the consequences of a double betrayal. Reward depends on your performance, but a minimum of 50,000 fate points. Punishment for failure: believe me, if you fail, you won't even need a punishment. Felix is such a weak god. You wouldn't actually fail, would you? Slaying a god? What an overestimation of my capabilities. Even if Felix is a super weak god who just rose up to the level of a true god, I'm still not certain of being able to defeat him. The Adrian before me was no longer in a humanoid form. The true god's power had begun changing him, and with the distorted boundaries of reality, he soon transformed into a gigantic black spider. He was more hideous than a demon lord from one's worst nightmare and was fiercer than a colossal dragon. The 8 eyes of this gigantic black spider were filled with looks of greed as its disgustingly large mouth was already spewing digestive fluids that corroded the ground in front of it, and poison kept leaking out of its tail. The ground where it stepped with its poison needle-studded feet would transform into a poisonous swamp. Divine power gave him powers far above the norm. Just its stare would cause people to feel despair, and just looking upon him would cause the weak-willed to go insane. But fight him to the death. We have nowhere to retreat. At least we shouldn't die like cowards. Yes, This wasn't the time to be wasting words repetitively. We had long since had nowhere to retreat to. HMPH. Lorsai, I'm definitely going to remember this. I spat some blood as I lifted my Roland's sacred sword again and led the charge. I was prepared to finish my epic quest. With a descended god as our opponent, the battle pushed us to the brink right at the very start. The gigantic spider was incredibly dexterous despite its size, and its enormous legs resembled an exquisitely well-controlled mecha as it moved. It easily tore through our defensive structures over the entire defense line. Under the poison god's control, a black mist surrounded its body, which directly destroyed all magic spells and arrows before they could even reach him. But the biggest headache of all was the poisonous mist he was emanating, as anyone who so much as touched it died on the spot. There was not even a single survivor. I've analyzed the divine power. It's not just a simple poison. It's the concept of corrosion and withering. He's distorting life into death. Definitely don't touch that. Just as Harlois finished speaking, one of Felix's gigantic eyes fixated on her as he spat a black gob of poison in her direction. Felix was no mindless beast. He had senses far surpassing that of others, so even if Harlois only had the physical appearance of a black cat, he immediately classified her as the number one threat since she could point out his divine power's nature. And while the battle was raging on ferociously, not far away on an observation tower's deck the Beastmen tribe leaders were watching this scene with cold eyes. Shouldn't we send our forces to help out? Isn't that our ally? The Boar tribe leader seemed somewhat confused. He believed that they were supposed to be the main characters on the battlefield, so why were they simply watching their ally fight while watching from behind? This wasn't how Beastmen would typically act. Help. HMPH, after that spider kills off the humans, if it doesn't turn around and kill us next, then I'll thank the war god for protecting me. Ally? Even though our ally has such strong combat capabilities, she watched us lose so many after last night's battle and only now she sends Felix to fight? Isn't this just trying to steal the battlefield achievements? Beastmen preferred using their fists instead of their brains, but that didn't mean they were idiots. Lorsai's intentions were so obvious that even they could see them. Ammon reached out with his single remaining arm and collected a few snowflakes in his hand. They began to melt due to his body heat. Crack! Ammon clenched his fist tightly as a ferocious light emanated from his eyes. The current him was the unmistakable Beastman King. Everyone, prepare for battle. We must reorganize our squads before the snow gets heavier. In this battle, nobody, no species, is worthy of our trust. Warriors, prepare to die in battle. For our honor and for our ancestors' land, even if we're destined to be buried here, we must let this cruel world understand the courage of the Beastmen. Suddenly, an ancient horn sounded out from far away, a summons from a true ally of theirs. They're finally here. All the Beastmen tribe leaders had joyous looks, and when I received my scout's report, I was shocked. How are there still more Beastmen? Haven't they already used all their main forces? But the direction the Beastmen reinforcements were coming from, as well as the tribal flag that the air cavalry scout described to me, instantly helped me understand the situation. The Beastmen of the plains? That damned immortal organ. Since the plateau's Beastmen could directly reach the human territories through the Earth Elemental God's tunnels, then the Beastmen from the plains could surely do the same thing. Perhaps this was Immortal Lorcan's true final trump card. But right now, I was unable to do anything, because the highly venomous spider before us was already difficult enough to deal with. Harlois, make your preparations. If we must die here, we need to at least take these bastards with us. Yet, suddenly, another combat drum's sound rang out in a familiar elven song, which actually made that huge spider reveal an excited and happy expression like a human. However, when I listened to it carefully as well, I, too, smiled. It's finally here. Note: 1. The divine obligation refers to a god's area of specialty, concept, like how Wumian's is law, Felix's is poison, withering, and Clairladen's is the forest. Chapter 193, Silver Dignity. Iron Bloodline, Bronze Body, Silver Dignity, and Golden Will were the separate ranks the humans had created for each power level, and each rank contained endless amounts of hard work, blood, and tears. The silver and gold species didn't have any need to classify ranks in such a manner as they were innately born above the so-called silver and gold. In their eyes, Possessing such low-ranked power classifications was no different from giving their children power classifications, something which was deemed entirely unnecessary. Yet, for humans, each rank represented a foundational change in the warrior's power level. Iron bloodline and bronze body. These names were already self-explanatory. Human mages at these levels could create mana circuits within their bodies, while warriors could utilize their body's potential. Bronze body was synonymous with perfect body. Of course, this didn't mean their bodies were actually perfect, it meant that after reaching this level, ordinary humans would no longer be able to drag any more power out of their bodies. On the contrary, the definition of silver dignity was worth wondering about. After all, it was entirely distinct from the other ranks. The description of dignity for a power level was incomprehensible. After reaching this level, humans can finally have some dignity in front of other species, only this level can help humans be comparable to them. If you only look at the power level, then bronze and silver have very little different from each other, but some things can actually be felt when you're at a certain level. The difference between bronze and silver is the difference between the highest level that an ordinary person can achieve and the beginning of an extraordinary person's path. While the difference doesn't seem big, they're actually as far apart as the sky and the ground. While this was all rather a vague description, but for the truly strong in silver, this was as natural as breathing or eating. Think about asking a person how to breathe or how to use more strength and if there were any techniques to it. Perhaps everyone knew how to breathe, but nobody could say how they knew it or why. After reaching the silver rank, you won't have to worry about incomprehensible deaths. For the strong of the silver rank, life force and mental spirit were both actual foundational strengths, and they could generate the chi of a martial artist or the magic ring of a mage to create formless barriers. They had different effects, but all of them could block outside impacts. The strong of the silver rank had bodies that were their own domain and could resist against outside forces. At the very least, if you can know how you die, then it's enough to be at a cannon fodder's level. You can die with some pride. On the true, major battlefield, without being at the silver rank, it's not even enough to be cannon fodder. Under major spells cast by legends, ultimate sword techniques, or a divine domain, people would be just like an inanimate rock or a tree with zero power to resist. Just one thought or one look from these high-ranked existences could kill you, and there would be a zero chance of survival. How could I even win? In the generation where many species chaotically fought with each other, a young silver-ranked genius of his tribe had said that helplessly and sardonically about himself. And if the enemy is a god, even if it's only a low god who just ascended, I shouted loudly as I turned my will into a formless barrier to keep out the purple-gray divine domain of withering. If you aren't even at the silver rank, with divine domains most likely soon to be everywhere, you probably wouldn't even see your enemy before you die without realizing what's going on. And when I knew that I was about to face God-ranked opponents of Carwins's level in the future, I unhesitatingly used all my saved fate points, so that at the very least I wouldn't die without knowing what happened against opponents who possessed their own divine domains. And now, Carwins had left, but Felix doubtlessly possessed his own, true divine domain as well. From the moment of Felix's descent, a formless yet still present domain already enveloped half the city, and if anyone used any prophecy or detection-related abilities, then they would notice great purple smoke present everywhere. And it wasn't the doing of Felix's conscious efforts, it was the side effect of his obligation as the poison god, but just this side effect was more than enough to kill off the weak. Cough, cough. The injured behind us were coughing unstoppably, and this was followed by vast amounts of people spitting up blood. The fact that their blood was blackened was evidence of their worsening injuries. Mom, I feel so terrible. I can't breathe. In a shelter, a yellow-faced girl with lips turning pale green was requesting her mother for help, but she wasn't the only one. Most of the commoners taking refuge from the war were coughing in the shelters, and the sick were becoming sicker while the healthy suddenly fell ill. The infectious diseases were spreading as they pleased. The poison god's divine domain of withering was hurting them towards death. This was also one of the reasons why true gods were forbidden to descend. True gods that embodied a concept were always frightening. If they walked about on the mortal plane, they would nationally distort their surroundings. For example, if the tempest god descended, then waves as high as the sky would cause destruction in all directions. If the sun god descended, A terrifying heat would transform the mortal plane into hell. Even the descent of the law god would probably create a strange divine domain where any crime would be immediately punished. Felix was a half-spider, half-elf poison god, and his new divine job included the ending of nature, weathering poison, so within his divine domain, all living creatures would become distorted, and the chances of acquiring a disease would be vastly increased. Even the healthiest person would become deathly ill if they stayed within Felix's divine domain for too long. It wasn't that all the gods wanted to cause wanton destruction, it was simply unavoidable for them. So, no matter if it were the order gods or the chaos gods, they would try, as much as possible, to avoid descending either in a vessel or with their true bodies. But since Lorsi had already descended in her true body, the rules had long since been broken, so it didn't matter if Felix, who was under her command, broke the rules again. If we don't defeat him quickly, all of us will die. Perhaps this newly born rule-breaking poison god would eventually be punished by the other gods, but if we weren't able to take care of this god-ranked enemy right before us, we wouldn't live to see that anyways. The only part worth celebrating was the fact that the gigantic spider god before us was not very skilled at controlling his divine domain. It only spread out naturally from him, weakening the effects to the point where the warriors facing Felix wouldn't instantly perish just from his divine domain. Everyone that's below the silver rank, retreat together with the citizens, and get as far away as possible from his divine domain. It doesn't matter what your overall rank is, your body has to be at least of the silver rank. Yet even the strong ones of the silver rank were nothing more than cannon fodder that could last a few seconds. Just being stared at for a few seconds by this gigantic spider would cause many to spit blood and die, but what surprised even me was that my condition was surprisingly good. It seemed that Felix's divine domain had no effect on me, which was something not even a legend rank could claim to be able to pull off. The domain of my physical body seemed to have completely cut me off from the divine domain's influence. It didn't seem to be some simple coincidence, rather, it was the special ability of my bloodline. Host's willpower is over 20, host is at the silver rank. Now that you are under the suppression of a divine domain, I would like to congratulate the host. You have awakened your racial talent, Chaos Barrier. Protect your mind from being suppressed by divine or mental realms. Reduce the effects of anything that attempts to reduce your willpower or vision. Although the explanation was rather vague and straightforward, it was doubtlessly one of the most practical abilities suitable for my current situation. At the very least, with its assistance, I was able to calmly assess the circumstances, make adjustments, and take command. What? Go fight in melee combat? With the current me, unless I used some forbidden techniques, I doubt I would cause any damage to Felix. I would prefer to not be suicidal. Borealis, cover us with cannon fire. In this long, snow-filled, and back-and-forth battle, the Borealis was pretty much useless during the night when it had no way of seeing anything. However, it still had plenty of remaining ammunition and energy, and as I gave the command, Envy, who was rearing for battle, instantly turned on all the cannons. Boom. Boom. Numerous explosions popped up like fireworks all over Felix's body, as the mage towers didn't rest with their continuous thunderbolts and fireballs. When combined with the sound of explosions, it was truly a grand scene. Unfortunately, in front of the astonishing defense of a true god who had descended into a vessel, these mortal technologies and spells couldn't even break through its defenses. However, this is enough for a smoke screen, Amelia. Ha! With a shout, the green-haired witch flew up into the air like a meteor, and when she suddenly changed direction downwards, she was coming down at a far greater and more frightening speed than an actual meteor. For the gigantic Felix, that was only an ignorable human the size of a grain of rice, but Amelia's sudden, tremendous punch made him cry out in pain as he shook all over. Judging from the dark green poisonous liquid spurting out from his wound, this punch had pierced through his heart. Amelia had used her strength to demonstrate that experience trumped power. Even if her ability was naturally countered by Felix, she was a veteran semi-god, she still had her way of battling. When the elite warriors of the allied armies rushed over to the spider's side, they all stopped suddenly. There are sticky substances on the ground. Be careful, there are also invisible webs. That was, unfortunately, their final words. Felix, who had just received such a heavy impact, angrily activated his divine domain at full force, causing a gray-black poisonous mist to spread everywhere. The closest warriors to him were the first to fall victim to it, with strange rashes appearing all over their bodies. And just like that, they fell over while still staring in angry disbelief. Seeing the way those warriors had died so pitifully, the warriors behind them began hesitating. Since it had come to this, none of them were afraid of sacrifice, but the sacrifice had to have meaning. What was most fortunate, however, was that the interference of a god was sure to bring another god's intervention to balance things out. When Felix descended into Adrian, some existences could finally have an excuse to interfere. Our reinforcements eventually arrived. A familiar, brilliant silver light descended. Wumian's will had always been watching this battlefield, and when the enemy's true gods ignored the rules and did as they pleased, it was time for him to interfere as well. When that light dissipated, an entire military squad appeared before us. Those various flags were rather nostalgic, and the familiar faces caused several shouts of surprise. Dragonslayer Basler. That's a legend rank hero's spirit. Isn't that General Lowler? She died just 2 days ago on the battlefield, and General Basler is dead as well. How are they alive? Idiot, they're heroic spirits now. Didn't the true god make a declaration earlier? Any warrior that died for the sake of defending this land would be able to become a true heroic spirit. This cruel war had caused countless brave Northland warriors to die on this piece of land, but it also allowed the newly born guardian god of the Northlands to open up his own Hall of Valhalla for heroic spirits. And, right now, under Basler's leadership, this newly born heroic spirit squad re-entered the mortal plane. Each thrown spear transformed into a bolt of lightning as the sword-wielding heroic spirits began slicing the spider web. They now had the advantage, and Felix was forced to retreat, but a fierce look gleamed from his 8 eyes as he once again sent more power into his death-inducing divine domain. This time, however, the effect was minimal. The heroic spirit squad before him actually ignored the threat of his divine domain and even took the opportunity to unleash a fresh round of attacks on him. Just a little thinking helped me understand the reason for Felix's pitifulness. Heroic spirits were of the undead to begin with, and they were only souls, without physical bodies like living creatures. Of course they wouldn't become distorted from Felix's life-altering divine domain, and it was obviously impossible for them to become poisoned. This was the natural counter to Felix's powers. Perhaps the most attention-grabbing person on the battlefield was Dragonslayer Basler. Innumerable sharp weapons appeared in midair as precious mystical weapons rained down upon Felix like a storm, with ancient Halvan magical rune scrolls spreading across the entire area. From the very start, Basler was going all out. During the dragon-slaying battle, he had temporarily reached the boundary of a true god's level through the help of the power boost provided by the Great Judgment. Now that he understood this power, which was as unstoppable as the ocean, and with the elf god's divine obligation and divine authority right before him, he would, of course, give it his all. The master he had sworn loyalty to had obviously indicated that Basler could proceed in increasing his rank. Huge spears kept piercing into Felix's body, the cannon fire kept raining down from the Borealis without a break, and the witch's ambushes were deadly with every punch. The poison god found that he was actually forced to the brink as the injuries on his body kept increasing. But even so, just the heroic spirit squad's combat power by itself was insufficient to deal with a god. Spider's Grey Forest. For Felix, the opponents before him were a bit difficult to deal with, so he was forced to use his power, the power that he had just barely learned how to use. The concepts of nature, elves, corrosion, and withering all melded together as the Spider Prince Felix transformed nightmares into reality. In his divine domain, countless strange plants suddenly sprouted. Those plants were twisted and ugly, and these stinky trees were growing at a tremendous pace before soon transforming into a bizarre, thick forest. In the darkness of this forest, there were many massive magical beasts with 8 legs and multiple eyes, and these nightmares then came to life and entered the battlefield. Everything before us was now a scene of utter chaos. It didn't seem to be a many against one battle at all. It had now transformed into something resembling a battle between 2 armies. But this wasn't the only chaotic battle at the Red Maple defense line. At a place not far from here, 2 real armies were testing each other's mettle. On one side, it was the Beastmen of the plains that had come through Emir Lorcan's tunnels. At the very beginning, The Earth Elemental God had come to an agreement with Ammon Bloodox to not complete the tunnels, as they didn't want the Beastmen of the plains to take away their combat achievements. But when the battle reached a stalemate, Ammon and Imardalorcan finally resolved themselves to summon new reinforcements. As for the forces fighting against them, apart from the diverse species of underground demons, there were even more elves. But Felix's delight was destined to go unanswered, as those elves weren't his reinforcements. Apart from the quiet underground allied armies, there were also 30,000 elves of a new species. Their gray-black skin was very similar to the skin of the Dark Elves, and they had also accepted Lorsai the fallen goddess power at one time. Now, however, these elves had a slightly lighter skin tone, and under the leadership of a Banshee princess, they had broken free from Lorsai's control and stood against the Dark Elves. The underground armies combined with the Grey-blood Elves were on guard against the Beastmen from the plains that had arrived after traveling a great distance. Both armies remained vigilant against each other, but neither army seemed to have the resolve to bring it to direct combat. And in the military camp, as Suana gazed at the gigantic spider in the distance, which was the size of a small mountain, she had an expression filled with worry. After all, she knew that that was her father, the person she used to trust the most, the person she used to respect as a perfect king. Humans, who are innately such a weak species, are fighting to protect their home, but our elf tribe is still suffering from disasters. Our entire army and tribe have turned into fallen elves, and even our king has transformed into a monster. Perhaps nothing can save us now that it's come to this. Father, is this what you wanted? Is this your so-called pride as royalty? Chapter 194, Unwelcome Reinforcements. The unnatural amount of divine corrosive power was beginning to infect the world. As a true god, Felix had already stayed in the mortal plane for too long, and his divine power had started to rewrite the natural laws of this world. The space itself was transforming into his divine country. Grayish-purple clouds began gathering in the air, and the snowflakes that fell from them were actually dark purple. The fierce winds had a faintly sweet smell to them, but anyone that accidentally inhaled this air would feel dizzy in their heads. With Felix as the center, a large area was now devoid of all plant life. All the plants in a circle had withered to death. As for small animals, if they hadn't died already, they would have become distorted and transformed into frightening magical beasts that preyed on humans. The battle between the humans and the true god continued. Even against the true god's descent into a vessel, the defending army still didn't give up, and they kept adding more members to make up for the ones that had fallen. Perhaps it should be said that they were stalling for time and surviving the best they could. This was a battle where victory couldn't be seen, or if I described it more directly, then this was a suppressive slaughter. In the increasingly distorted world, the poison had already infected the very air itself. Every moment someone would suddenly fall over and die. And the brave warriors of the vanguard fighting against this humongous spider were dying even quicker in front of Felix's sharp claws and god-level poison. If it weren't for the heroic spirit squad that didn't care about sacrifices or Felix's poison and the Borealis constant aerial bombardments providing enough of a bother to Felix, perhaps this battle would have been over already. Yet merely stalling like this wasn't a good idea at all. Even if the heroic spirit squad was dealing with the brunt of Felix's wrath, for the northern country's strongest warriors to simply die like this, without even a chance for a direct battle, it was only a chance for them to be sent to Woomian's Hall of Valhalla together with the heroic spirits that fell again. Is this the power of a true god? How despairing, if such an existence appeared in Allland. Himmet, who had an expression of worry, could only shake his head as he watched the battle through his binoculars from a distant observation tower. At first, the Allland Empire had sent him and a White Wolf squad as only the in-name reinforcement guest army. Their goal was to collect information on the north. Darso's ambition had always been burning, while also transporting goods, but nobody expected that yet another Beastman assault to occur just like so many times in the past, transforming the place into a cruel battlefield. Is this a holy war? Everyone has become red-eyed with bloodlust, and even those rarely seen legend-rank heroes and true gods have come out. Every country's most treasured silver and gold-ranked warriors have actually become nothing more than cannon fodder on the battlefield. Oh, another dozen or so have just died. It takes us a minimum of 10 years to train a strong silver warrior that doesn't rely on equipment. Him sighed in his heart. Not a single person had expected the battle to escalate to such an extent. Up until now in this battle, the northern humans, elves, and beastmen had given their all in order to obtain greater benefits and land for their own species. In the short period of just 2 months, many undying existences had already perished. Not just the elemental gods but even a true god had died previously. Merely the ascension of the new true god Felix was major news that would shock the entire world. And apart from the war fought out in the open, the elemental gods and the citizens of the underground were also getting secretly involved. Countless new weapons of war were changing this generation, and now even the true gods weren't caring about their appearances and participated directly in battle. There now wasn't a single person who would dare say that the battle in the north was just a small affair. If all holy wars are battles to such an extent, then even a mega empire probably wouldn't be able to survive for long. It seems that I really need to have a good discussion with His Majesty and Her Majesty when I return. Hey, I need to be lucky enough to survive past this, however. Him shook his head and got rid of his idle thoughts. He then proceeded to hand over a magic crystal that had recorded large amounts of information to a Griffin Knight who had been waiting for his orders for quite some time. Hand this over to His Majesty Darsos. What about you? Do you intend to stay here? I recommend that you leave together with me. It was quite natural for the Griffin Knight to be worried about Hemmet. If Red Maple Castle was lost, then the Beastmen and the Poison God wouldn't spare Hemmet just because he was from Holland. Hemmet, however, shook his head at the Griffin Knight. I intend to watch his battle to the very end. It is worthy of me exchanging my life for first-hand information. And I still believe that humanity can win. The Griffin Knight took off into the air and flew southward. Just as a feather from the griffin fell on Hemmet's hand, heavy footsteps sounded out from behind him. Hemmet already knew who they belonged to. You guys want me to approve sending you out to battle? You saw it for yourselves. You are equivalent to nothing more than cannon fodder in a battle of this level. Everyone behind him was silent and didn't respond, but this was evidence of the White Wolf Imperial Knight's determination. Even if they were merely a guest army, watching the deaths of other humans and the slaughter of ordinary citizens without doing anything was something they couldn't stand as knights. They could only be cannon fodder? These knights were no greenhorns to the battlefield, so of course they knew the difference in level. Yet even though they were aware that they were walking a thorny path, the knights still had expressions of resolution and steadily held onto their weapons. From the start of battle until now, their desire to fight had been continually burning, and their blood had always been boiling. Knights fight for justice. We swear to sacrifice our blood in order to resist the injustice and evil. Knights fight in order to protect. We treat the weak with kindness, but when butcher knives are aimed at the innocent, weak, elderly, and ill, we shall transform into the most solid walls of flesh and blood. Knights fight for the royalty. We protect our homes and swear loyalty to our lords, but justice is what we listen to above all. If there's a conflict between justice and our lords, we shall choose according to our hearts. At this moment, the ancient spirit of chivalry seemed to be in full effect. The silence was the choice that all these knights made even with their oaths of loyalty towards the All-End Empire. Hemmet shook his head. He had expected this outcome. It seems that I said something unnecessary. It would only bring humiliation upon the White Wolf Knights to have you guys retreat. It would make these northern hick countries look down on the All-End Empire. Go and perform well, and don't let the northerners look down on All-End. Make the All-End White Wolf Knights proud. White Wolves. Victory. That was the angry roar of the White Wolf Knights. They all left with such a short battle cry, fully intending to not return. Hemmet shook his head again as the knights left and returned to paying attention to the combat situation. Knights had a knight's duty, while a tactician had a tactician's duty. The most important thing for Hemmet to do right now was to obtain as much combat information as possible. Some information could be worth lives. Every minute was precious, and he wouldn't allow himself to relax and miss anything. But, the next thing he saw through his binoculars confused him. That Roland, why did he stop? Are they trying to dodge something? Carodian, the temporary leader of the Tiger tribe, had been chosen by all the Beastmen of the plains. He was also the one who summoned all his fellow Beastmen for this attack. In a way, he was also familiar with Ren. Last time, during their previous invasion 2 years ago, He was among the Beastmen that had been defeated. Carodian was known throughout the entire Beastmen society for being a tremendously aggressive warhawker. Every year, in the tribe leaders' conference, he would always shout, "We should demolish the East Mist communal country and fight our way to San Antonio." Yet the Beastman, who was always so decisive, now had an expression filled with hesitation. He seemed to have some regret. Fighting here with the elves for no apparent reason? This seems absolutely pointless. Battle was the product of politics. Nobody would want to fight a battle in which there were no benefits. Ammon had promised the Beastmen of the plains that they would cooperate in attacking the humans and splitting the humans' territory. Of course, if they won in the end, how much Amon's side and Carodian's side could obtain still depended on their strength after the war. If Carodian used up some of his precious military strength for no apparent reason against this enemy that he felt like he had no reason to fight, it wouldn't be worth it at all. Look, up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a dragon knight. It's Superman. Wait, no, it's just a naked muscular man wearing nothing but underpants. PFFT. So disgusting. Soon, however, Carodian didn't have to hesitate anymore, as the huge figure that descended from the sky happened to land right between the two armies. Boom. When that person fell to the ground, he instantly moved himself into what he considered a dignified thinking pose. And when he realized that everyone was looking at him, he suddenly lifted his arms, flexed his muscles, and placed his fists against each other in a pose that was obviously to show off his muscles. Then, he smiled. "Love and peace. Please stop, this world is so beautiful, we shouldn't fight. We should all love each other. Make love, not war." With his white teeth reflecting the sunlight, this muscular man was smiling like the sun. His words kept increasing in volume, and by the end, he was even singing the last few words. But the most discomforting part of all was that even though he was obviously a ridiculously muscular fellow, he had a handsome and pretty face that seemed like it belonged in a shoujo manga superscript 1. He even appeared to have an expression of embarrassment, and this tremendous contrast seemed to add to his ridiculousness. "Kill that pervert for me." "Okay, then," Carodian unhesitatingly shouted out what so many people were thinking, and his subordinates instantly attempted to carry out his order. It wasn't only the Beastmen who acted impulsively. At the exact same time, even Annie and Suana had ordered their soldiers to fire arrows. Unfortunately, before any arrows could reach that man, they all fell to the ground as if there was an invisible barrier around him. "Oh my, what disobedient children!" "Then, allow me, Omar, to teach you what is love." Omar flexed his frontal muscles, his back muscles, and his six-pack in a series of exercise fitness routines that made people feel like throwing up in disgust. He glowed brilliantly, and in the next instant, countless amounts of undead armies suddenly materialized out of thin air. "My heart contains all my citizens, and as a king, wherever I stand is where my country is. My undead are beloved to me, and they love me as well. Come, this is my ultimate love." He gave an extravagant kiss towards those skeletons and wiggled his eyes seductively. The brainless skeletons under his control actually made embarrassed reactions in unison, and as for those poor undead that still retained their intelligence, Annie learned, for the first time, that even the undead were capable of being disgusted to the point of kneeling on the ground and throwing up. But strength was, by far, the most effective method to get people to listen to you. Even though Omar was obviously a pervert, the hordes of undead caused the Beastmen who had been so furious to begin retreating. "Is it Lord Omar? Those bones, Roland probably can't last much longer. Please hurry and support him." "Oh, are you the red-haired Annie girl? Small Lionheart told me about you, you're just like what I heard." "So cute. Have you ever considered joining me and becoming a star idol? I recently created many new beautiful poses and dances, and if we team up as a dance team, we'd surely shock the entire world." "I think it would scare the entire world instead." Okay, Annie at least knew that the person before her was definitely quite strong, so she merely retorted and complained in a tiny voice only she could hear. "Why is he even more ridiculous than what I heard? I didn't hear that he had all these problems." However, in the next instant, Omar's response helped everyone understand. "Relax, reinforcements have already been sent to help father. That guy's such an interesting person, he helped me learn so much about love, and I definitely can't match up to him. When I noticed the black dot in the distance that kept increasing in size, I inwardly realized the truth and couldn't stop my eyebrows from twitching. It was definitely good that I had reinforcements, but if my reinforcements were that person, well, let's just say I would have preferred to fight without his help. Look, up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a dragon knight. It's Superman. Whoops. No, it's a Beastmen. Ah, hide. The black dot kept growing larger in my vision before it suddenly crashed into the ground, knocked over a small building, and created a small crater. What? Is he dead? The sounds of shock must have been from people who didn't know him, since, after all, no, even if all of Ike is destroyed, that guy won't die. Those who knew him were, of course, aware of this undying gentleman. Ah, I almost died. As I expected, in the very next instant, that guy's head poked out from the building's rubble with an expression as if he had just barely survived a calamity. However, I knew that he deserved whatever he got. You bastard half-dragon. If you decide to tug off my scales one more time and touch wherever you please, I'm going to toss you into a volcano. From above the clouds was the sound of an angry roar. With a powerful gale, a purple magic dragon descended from the clouds. After landing, it transformed into a human that glared at the legend rank hunter who was attempting to look everywhere but at the dragon. Thunderspeed dragon? This is your animal companion? I had heard that Beifeng had used his own dragon blood to ally himself and contract their contract with the Thunderspeed dragon. The Thunderspeed dragon was known as the swiftest among all dragons, and only it could have brought Beifeng from Manchuan to here in just a single night. Well, it's not bad that you could come, but you won't be all that useful here. You might as well have let Adam come instead. I wasn't looking down on him. Our opponent was the poison god Felix. A legend-ranked hunter and a young dragon wouldn't help balance the scales by all that much, so it would have been better if the dragon had brought Adam here. But, right then, I heard a familiar foolish laugh. Hey, I didn't expect you to believe in me so much. I turned around and looked behind me. Wasn't that Adam, the most useful tank? The current him was completely naked except for his underwear and the magical runes that were scribbled all over him. It turned out that right when the Thunderspeed dragon had landed, it had unfurled the giant magical carpet it had been carrying, the carpet which had pre-prepared magical runes and spell formations on it. When this simplified spell formation synchronized with the larger, more complex one in Anchuan, Margaret had been able to use her remaining magical ingredients to cast another teleportation spell. And of course, Adam, who was currently laughing like a fool, was the person who had been teleported. That's wonderful. I laughed raucously in delight as I kicked Adam away. Go be my meat shield, I need 15 minutes of absolute safety. Okay then. I'm not going to talk anymore about how that naked man went to battle with a face filled with displeasure. With such a top-level meat shield around, it instantly reduced the pressure on the other warriors immensely, and it also opened up the possibility for me to accomplish something else. When Harlois pointed out Felix's characteristics, it immediately attracted his attention and enmity. Perhaps there was nothing that could be hidden from Felix in his own divine domain, and I would be unable to do anything significant without sufficient protection. However, now that the tank was here, I could activate a new type of trump card. Cast a forbidden spell such as Frozen H. First of all, it's a major spell that would require more than 1 or 2 hours to finish chanting, not to mention that even if I gave up my life, I wouldn't be able to cast such a high-level forbidden spell. Moreover, even without considering the severe side effects to the environment that such a spell would cause, I felt that such a large-scale forbidden spell would probably be unable to defeat Felix. I also felt that the moment I started chanting such a high-level spell, the tremendous surges in the waves of mana it would generate would undoubtedly make Felix ignore everything else and attempt to kill me at all costs. In the past, I had the protection of the armies of undead, but that was no longer the case. If my opponent had been an innumerable amount of beastmen, then I wouldn't have had any way to deal with them, but if my opponent was something like a true god, then I really did have an ace card up my sleeve. Well, it wasn't exactly an ace card since it was a trump card that definitely broke the rules. It would surely cause me endless amounts of trouble, but I had still prepared it for this type of circumstance. And it was also the existence of this ace card that gave me the courage to face Carwins by myself. After all, with the passage of so many years, It was quite possible for Carwins to suddenly turn on me, so I wouldn't possibly appear in front of him if I, at least, couldn't protect myself. Carwins was nice enough to only chat with me, so I still had this ace card to use right now. And since my opponent had totally disregarded the rules, this ace card of mine, which was definitely on the borderline of the gray area, wouldn't cause any trouble for me either. As I had thought, just the beginning of my casting attracted a large amount of sky-covering poisonous spit to be spat in my direction. However, I didn't even glance at it, and I continued to focus on my preparations. I had full belief that someone would block that troublesome poisonous spit for me. Ah, my underpants. It's over. I'm so humiliated. As I expected, Adam blocked the poisonous spit for me, but the corrosive, poisonous mist ended up destroying his only remaining article of clothing. He was now utterly naked. Time out. Wait for me to put on some pants. Hey, I even said time out. Why aren't you obeying the rules? This lady over here, could you please loan your skirt to me? Hey, don't run away, I'm not really a pervert. I just saw that you weren't wearing much to begin with, and it seemed easy to take off. Pervert. Okay then, let us ignore this person who actually tried to borrow clothing from a female mage and ended up getting slapped. The fact was, however, that his presence gave me enough time to safely cast the ace card spell that I was determined to use here. God's Descent. Note: 1. Shoujo manga. Shoujo manga is manga aimed at a teenage female readership. Chapter 195, Judgment. The battle before us was already difficult to the point of despair. Even though the warriors weren't afraid of sacrifices, the enemy was immune to ordinary weapons, and it was nigh impossible to scratch his defenses. Any battle that was impossible to win would nationally lower the warriors' morale. In front of true gods, all are nothing but dance. Main true god of the elves, Ansler Shusta Alderban. Although I didn't approve of such arrogant words, I couldn't help but admit that these existences known as gods were the most annoying types of entities, and it was all due to their undying natures and broad divine domains. This, right now, was the perfect example. No matter how hard the mortals worked, they were unable to cause any life-threatening harm to Felix, and even if they somehow managed to injure him, Felix only needed to spend some divine power and would recover in the next second. What dance? Humphrey, it's just that divine power is too powerful and disables the mortals from landing fatal blows. But, it's not impossible to deal with. God's Descent. Yes, my method was God's Descent as well. This was the ace card I had left for myself when I had ascended to a god. It was my safeguard against any powerful beings that may come looking for trouble later. True gods couldn't be defeated. Even if this was treated as a maxim in this world, I had never believed it. However, I had to admit that the special concept known as divine power was incredibly difficult to deal with. Since I wanted to reach my goal in this holy war, I knew that I would be facing true gods sooner or later, and the simplest method to deal with them was to also possess divine power. This was also why I had spent so much effort on creating a true god that was worthy of having believers. What was the condition for a god's descent? It was that the souls should be similar and the bodies should be compatible. And there was nobody else who would be more compatible with Woomians. We were the same to begin with, after all, and we could skip all the rituals. The Moon Elves were able to achieve a god's descent with a synchronization ratio of about 60%. Carwins had specially prepared Rand's body so that he could synchronize with her at about 80%. However, between Woomians and me, our synchronization was 100% from the very start. Moon Elves needed to change their soul wavelengths in order to begin the ritual for a god's descent, but for me, all I needed to do was make a connection with my other self in the heavens. Of course, an overly high synchronization wasn't necessarily good either, as two entirely identical souls would create another problem. But now wasn't the time to be worrying about that. With the two identical wills and souls connecting, a blinding, silver light descended as a lustrous balance appeared in midair. The judge's silver mask materialized together with a similarly silver divine domain that began clashing with the grayish-purple divine domain. Through my body, the law god and guardian god of the north, Woomians, had descended. Hey, is this the feeling of a god? My awareness was crystal clear. I could clearly notice Hamit's shocked expression in the far-off observation tower as he dropped his binoculars. Falsity did not exist in a god's eyes. A god could see truth in souls for what they were. I could sense the enormous amount of faith transforming into strength as it rushed to my divine domain through the pillars of heaven. Most of the chains of faith in the Northlands were related to me as I was the guardian god of the Northlands. These many believers helped augment my strength. Increasing my strength right now isn't a good thing. I don't have much time, I should hurry. One body could only possess one soul. When two souls shared the same body for too long, they would instinctively begin trying to suppress and devour each other even if special methods were used to make one soul subordinate to the other. However, this wasn't a problem for me. Woomians was just an automated version of myself to begin with, and our souls were identical. It was just like two file folders that contained identical documents. No matter how much you overlapped them, they would still be the same. That wasn't my problem. Damn it, we have already started combining. Yes, my problem wasn't about the god's descent in itself, instead, it was about how I would separate from Woomians after I was finished. Let me make an analogy. A normal god's descent was akin to the mixing of oil and water. They would have to work on making two completely different existences come together and synchronize to raise the compatibility rate. On the other hand, my god's descent was like the mixing of water and water. The biggest problem was how to separate the two afterward. Right now, I had already achieved a strategic goal, as vast amounts of knowledge and secrets poured into my mind and a tremendous amount of divine power filled my body. Even though I took a circuitous route, I was finally able to still the knowledge and wisdom of the true gods. The secrets of the right to become a god, the structure of the power of faith, reincarnation, the Hall of Valhalla, this was all worth it. Some things could only be seen upon reaching a certain level. I had been awaiting these divine secrets for quite a while, and now that I possessed them, the next step of my plan could finally be realized. My future personal development now became much clearer. I finally made progress. With this, I can focus entirely on increasing my personal combat strength. Yet now wasn't the time to rejoice, as my consciousness was already becoming blurry. Woomians was like a vast ocean absorbing a small river, me. If this combination continued, perhaps we would never be able to be separated again. No matter if Woomians is pulled down here or if I'm pulled up to the heavens, neither is an acceptable end. That would mean everything I've worked for and waited for was all wasted. All these thoughts flashed through my mind in a short instant. The bystanders only saw Roland floating in midair as a silver judge's cap materialized on his head and his divine power transformed into a divine domain. The silver and grayish-purple divine domains clashed against and invaded each other. Each tried to force itself above the other divine domain. The two descended gods clashed against each other in an instant, using the most barbaric method of all to prove their strength. Perhaps Roland as a host was far stronger than Adrian, perhaps Woomians was simply stronger than Felix since Woomians had two divine obligations, or perhaps Felix was still far too weak as he had just recently ascended to the position of a true god because it was obvious who the victor was at first glance. The silver divine domain won overwhelmingly. A battle between gods. The battle which would determine the master of the Northlands rose to the final level, as even the gods began directly interfering in the fight. Although the current me seemed rather majestic, I actually had a severe headache, with my consciousness becoming hazy. I only wanted to go to sleep. But I knew that if I slept now, I might never wake up again. Shadow. With a low roar, a hallucinatory shadow came to life and attached itself to my body as it greedily devoured divine power and grew. This was the strength that I had obtained from that great snowy mountain. That frigid nightmare that just couldn't hatch had finally transformed, but it had transformed into a piece of ice named Shadow. Currently, it was just a newborn that severely lacked nutrition, and divine power from the same source was the best nutrition of all. What did I mean by same source? Woomians' divine power was from the same source as me, and this frigid nightmare was my companion and was also from the same source as me. As a result, the frigid nightmare and Woomians had the same source of power. Frigid nightmares would grow together with their hosts and would absorb their hosts' emotions in order to evolve. As for this newly born frigid nightmare named Shadow, it had already absorbed more than 300 years of negative emotions from me. Perhaps growing up in such a crazed and twisted environment created its frightening power. Even when it had just hatched, it could already easily toy with and kill Fismer. If it can absorb enough divine power in order to make up for its shortcomings of being unable to hatch for so long, its growth potential was unimaginable. I was greatly looking forward to witnessing his growth. After being suckered by the silver divine power, Shadow, who was formerly black, began changing in color, and its hallucinatory form also began to materialize. Thanks to the power of luck and coincidence, a brand new divine creature was being born. From far away, Shadow seemed only like a pair of wings of light belonging to Woomians, as it was actually shining brilliantly and beautifully. Lustrous wings kept spreading out as a silvery white hooded cape blocked Woomians' face, and Woomians' silver mask materialized in the mortal plane along with numerous one-eyed emblems. He was watching everywhere, judging the entire world. To tell the truth, all this customized equipment was the form that Shadow chose to take. As it was a part of me, Shadow was currently helping me bear part of Woomians' divine power, and finally helped ease my burden so that I could spare enough attention to manipulate this unimaginably strong divine power. Target locked on Felix. Divine art, great judgment. A silver light covered the entire world as the god of law, with wings of light, reached his arms out to the sky and summoned an aimless massive book of law in front of him. Judgment. A silver-white gavel generated endless waves in the air as the masked and robed judge began judging the sinner before him. In the law god's divine domain, there wasn't a single crime that would be able to escape his eyes. Currently, under the eyes of justice, an untold number of crimes appeared as the book of law kept turning to the page with the punishments for crimes. In front of the law god and the original book of law, there wasn't a single existence that would be spared, not even a god. You are all judged to be guilty. The silver-colored divine domain began spreading. Since the Beastmen were here as well, how could I possibly just let them go? They were still waiting at the scene of the crime to split their spoils, so I was going to judge them together as well. Hiss. Unfortunately, the spider god Felix's high-pitched screaming tore through my spreading divine domain, and dealing with its struggling took up much of my concentration, causing me to lose the chance to deal with all the troublesome Beastmen in one go. Silence. I reduced the size of my divine domain and used silver chains to bind the gigantic spider god. I had always believed in the maxim better safe than sorry, so I used all of my divine power and concentration on the opponent before me. Divine law, the primary sin of the 13 sins. Those who purposefully take away others' lives shall be severely judged by the law god, they shall suffer from impaling and fire torture even after death. The divine laws didn't have a limit on their targets to begin with. They were the laws created by the law god, as well as his teachings and the meaning for the law god's existence. Yep, from the very start, I had never set targets for what the divine laws could and couldn't judge. It had always been my intention to judge the gods. Judge the gods? Are you crazy? Ayer was shocked at the time. No, this world is the one that's crazy, was my response. Just let someone as crazy as me to make you idiots high above us, you bastards who treat the lives of human, hard-working humans, as nothing more than toys. I shall teach you what the pride of the mortals is. If I don't pull you bastards in front of me to be judged, then how could I ever end this damned battle? Divine law, execution. The silver chains binding Felix began materializing and dragged the spider god into the mortal plane as Felix's purple divine soul started entering his body. This judgment was to take effect directly against the true god's actual body. A silver rack transformed into sharp knives and the incantation of law turned into a viciously boiling sea of magma. The spider god was currently tortured in both this world and the other plane. But, this was only the beginning. Divine law, the seventh sin of the 13 sins. Those who fulfill their personal desires yet forget their original divine obligations, break the laws, act greedily, and play around shall be stripped of all their jobs and demoted to mortal status. Felix, you willfully descended and created a bloodbath, caused a battle, and killed countless lives. Many grudge-bearing souls in the river Styx are because of you. Even though he was currently being tortured by knives and fire, the furious spider was still trying his utmost to struggle and escape from his restraints. He had a premonition that this was about to be his end. You no longer deserve to be a god. I declare right here and now that I demote the poison god Felix to become mortal. The complete suppression of Felix's divine domain helped the incantation of law great judgment be effective. At this very moment, Felix lost his divine domain, and now, no matter how much strength he had remaining, he was nothing more than a giant spider instead of a venerated true god. I knew that after my divine domain dissipated, Felix would recover his status as a true god. I was still far from possessing the power to truly judge the gods, and this type of power suppression wouldn't be able to last long. But it was enough. Something white viciously struck Felix's head and caused him to scream in agony. As my oldest and most trusted partner, Adam would never let such an opportunity slip past him. The massive injury on Felix's head didn't heal instantly like before. Without his divine domain, and without his divine defense and undying attribute, Felix was now no longer anything more than a slightly larger than usual and more robust normal beast. Hurry! Don't waste this opportunity that Lord Woomians has created for us. White wolves. Victory. Silver cross. Charge. Don't let those southern hicks steal away the achievement of slaying a god. This belongs to us. Black Eye Squad, grit your teeth for me and hang in there. Is there anyone else left from the Rhodes Imperial Guard? Damn it, even if I'm the only one left, I'm going to charge. I won't let anyone look down on me. The cannons on the Borealis had been overheating to the extent where they were almost unusable but were reignited once more as the heavily injured knights began their final charge. Amongst all the fatigued armies, the 4 elemental swordcasters who could replenish their sources of power stood out most of all. The other warriors had already used up all of their mana in this long, drawn-out battle, but as a product born in this new generation type of battle, the swordcasters had already recharged their mana through the Borealis. They were currently tossing out fireballs and thunder arrows, using the most basic elemental spells to deal irrecoverable damage to the former true god. Felix was on the brink of death. This isn't enough. We won't make it in time. I could sense that this wasn't enough. Felix had yet to receive a fatal injury, but I was almost unable to maintain this for any longer. I was already beginning to lose my mind as chaos and confusion filled my head, and I felt dizzier and wanted to sleep. But is there really nothing else I can do? It was so difficult to make it to this step. Was everything but a waste? I can't accept this. My soul and Woomians' soul were on the verge of complete synchronization, and if I didn't cancel the god's descent soon, I probably would never be able to do so. I wanted to grit my teeth and hold on, but my consciousness was becoming hazier, making holding on any longer seem meaningless. I just want to sleep. Why do I have to hold on? No, this is no good. Then, let me cancel the god's descent. My soul is beginning to combine. I definitely can't do that. Who am I? Woomians? Roland? Blackhand? Rolo? Alluring words were trying to steal my consciousness away, and Felix's divine power was still struggling against mine and increasing the speed of the fading of my consciousness. My chaotic memories were affecting my mental stability, and I was almost unable to hold on for any longer. But we Aurora Knights have returned. Let these invaders taste the fury of the mist. May the will of the mist remain unbroken forever. We have returned. Their familiar battle cries snapped me back to my senses. Weren't those in the sky our Imperial Knights? They finally made it just in time. The Imperial Knights of the Mist Kingdom, all 54 members of the Aurora Knights have arrived, and we pay our respects to Your Highness Roland. Your Highness, we have returned. Ah, my knights, I knew you wouldn't disappoint me. After all, no matter if it was 378 years ago, 252 years ago, 132 years ago, or 1 year ago, you never disappointed me. The Aurora Knights of the Eastern Mist Communal Country, all 174 members of the Aurora Knights have arrived. We pay our respects to Your Highness Roland. Your Highness, leave the rest to us. These new generation youngsters flew a circle around me with their teachers before putting on their iron helmets. They then began laughing maniacally as they charged towards the humongous spider who was still flailing around. Nice job, young one. The Lion King Frigid Nightmare who belonged to the first Mist King gave me his rare praise as he transformed into a colossal Lion King and pounced towards Felix. But, he came up empty. Adang is here. I shall beat up anyone who dares to bully my father. If it weren't for that familiar voice, perhaps not a single person would be able to connect that gigantic furious titan with gluttony. The giant, who suddenly landed, directly smashed Felix to the ground, as a huge bone dragon, which suddenly descended from the skies, shrieked and emanated death with every breath. This was a rarely seen scene. Undead knights and holy knights had allied with each other and were charging together. Dragon knights and bone dragons were actually on the same side, and the corpse-eating king was actually using a human holy sword. Imperceptibly, I felt as if I was getting closer to the utopia I dreamed of. I was already losing control of my hazy consciousness, but I held firmly onto the chains of the beast that was in my cage. Felix, you want to escape? Stop dreaming. Pay some interest for the amount of blood that you've caused to spill on this land. Later, I'll go looking for Loresite to collect the principal superscript 1. Note: 1. According to Wiktionary, principal not to be confused with principal refers to the money originally invested or loaned, on which basis interest and returns are calculated. Chapter 196, Slaying a God. An ancient epic was reenacted at this moment. An undying true God had managed to fall. The chains that represented divine punishment had pulled Felix down from his status as a true God. And without that status, he no longer had the divine power that could regenerate himself from his injuries, so he finally began panicking. After receiving the honor of becoming a god, he would never have been able to imagine that he would one day fall in battle. To him, battles were just games, and mortals were just the chess pieces on the chessboard. Yet this game had now turned fatal for him. Panic and helplessness finally appeared in his 8 eyes as he was now experiencing fear and despair for the first time, emotions which he had been giving to the mortals all this time. He truly wanted to escape, but it was already too late. The 7 deadly sins had arrived. Damned gods, have we people of the mist offended you? What's with all this? Is it so hard to just live peacefully? The furious Abbas of Wrath ripped off one of Felix's long legs in a single movement, causing dark purple poisonous blood to spray everywhere. The enormous 3-headed hellhound had already become larger than the gigantic spider, and 2 of Bastian's heads kept injuring Felix while the other head angrily roared and spat death. Without a doubt, he was venting his anger, but there was nothing wrong with him doing so. Many warriors were also shouting at the ugly spider. Why us? Why can't we just live peacefully in this land? The northern people had already suffered so much, and they, too, wanted to ask why war had to occur in their homeland again. Was it too much to ask for to want to live in peace? Yet Felix didn't answer, nor was he able to answer. Audang hates spiders. The huge titan, which was speaking in a low and muffled voice, had transformed into an enormous octopus, with its flexible yet robust tentacles curling around the vicious spider. Audang used suppression techniques that no human could use to seal Felix's efforts at resistance, and his thickest tentacle had turned into a round hammer that continually smashed Felix's head. To Audang, values such as truth and justice were never of importance. The concept of peace that humans believed in was also meaningless, but there was one point he absolutely couldn't tolerate. If anyone dared to harm his family, then Audang would go all out and viciously beat that person. Lock onto Felix's limbs, fire half of all our remaining ammunition. This time, cannon fire and smoke covered the skies. Even though Felix's still outstanding defense helped him ignore these cannon shells, Invis Borealis spun Felix around like a dragon before proceeding to brutally sink its horn into his forehead. That was a cursed horn belonging to a semi-god's single-horned whale. This strike, which contained some partial divine power, wasn't an attack that Felix, who had lost his divine power, was able to ignore. Hiss! Ah! Felix's sharp wails sounded just like the cruelest type of curse magic, but unfortunately, he was being suppressed by 2 undead even larger than himself. He was utterly incapable of movement. Felix could only obediently remain as our living target. But this was only the beginning. The newcomer to the 7 deadly sins wanted to show off its ability in front of its older siblings. Mine, all mine. I'm envious of your 8 divine eyes. I'm going to take them for myself. With a dark glow enveloping envy, Felix lost 4 of his eyes, and at this very instant, 4 dark green eyes appeared on the front half of the Borealis. And Felix, who had lost half of his eyes, was worse off than having been blind, as the chaotic situation for him turned into twisted scenery. He soon lost his balance under the suppression of the enormous undead that had been causing him to continually shake. Ah, my younger siblings, your older brother has arrived. That familiar magnanimous-sounding voice caused the two colossal undead beasts to pause simultaneously in surprise. This manner of addressing them would only be used by that fellow who causes everyone to feel discomfort when simply looking at him. But after his light-sounding words came a thunderstorm. Million undead armies. Countless undead armies suddenly appeared, and they furiously poured forth as if they had just erupted from a volcano. The low-level undead climbed over the gigantic spider. It was a magical version of a scene of ants swarming an elephant. Yet this still wasn't over. "Ah, my fist is beauty and justice. My justice is the will of my kingdom." The man in foam-fitting clothes made a sliding movement while being surrounded by innumerable thin threads that were, in fact, soul connections, which gave this man that nobody could stand looking at an endless amount of power. His ridiculously exaggerated flying kick pierced through the humongous spider's stomach, causing large amounts of divine blood to pour out from Felix's wound and distort any plants that it touched. The spider prince had received a heavy injury. Omar's attack definitely attracted everyone's attention, but what greeted him were his allies' complaints. "What's with calling yourself the older brother? You're the youngest. Adang is the oldest brother." The arrival of 4 of the 7 deadly sins along with strong reinforcements from the fresh new undead army that didn't know the meaning of fatigue finally helped the defending warriors relax. Meanwhile, the true guardians of this land, the Ace Knight Squadron that had the reputation of being undefeatable whenever they numbered over 100, had arrived once again in the present day. Those beautiful silver-white arcs in the sky were, shockingly, strong warriors. The veteran knights among them were in no hurry, and they acted like a wolf pack surrounding its prey as they searched for their enemy's weak point. And, at that moment, Felix, who was on the verge of collapsing, had already revealed his weak point. Everyone, prepared to charge. Use the death slide tactic. The Aurora Knights that never numbered over 100 actually had nearly 300 knights now. This famous number 1 ranked knight squadron in the Northlands had now revived itself from the ashes of the Mist Kingdom, and its classical combat strategy was now revisiting the stages of history. The seemingly shining aurora became beautiful silver meteors as they streaked through the sky. Their thrown spears and ice arrows froze Felix's critical areas and joints as the frigid nightmare steeds beneath them created paths of ice in the sky. When the crystal clear path in the sky was finally completed, the sleeping white dragon had transformed into a fatally sharp blade. Everyone, charge! At the beginning of the icy path in midair, the veteran knights were taking the lead as the newer knights loosened their grips on their reins and allowed the legendary frigid nightmares to carry them on this charge. Vanguard, ice blades. All invaders shall perish. As the Aurora Knights slid on the ice path, the accumulated power of the ice helped sharpen their icy blades as they kept enlarging and increasing in speed. By the time the Aurora Knights reached the ice path's end, their ice blades had transformed into fatal blades at soaring speeds. Countless huge blades pierced into Felix's body at light speed, and when most of the ice blades had pierced into his body, the Aurora Knights themselves mixed in with their ice blades and used their own bodies as blades. They transformed into rainbows of colors as they tore Felix's body apart once more. Rear guard, reorganize for the second charge. After exhausting their ice blades, the knights flew back up to the beginning of the ice path to begin a new round of construction of the ice blades. Unless all the Aurora Knights' frigid nightmares used up every last drop of their mana, this ice blade attack would never end. This was the death slide tactic that the Aurora Knights specially used for destroying mega-sized targets. The largest death slide tactic in history used 36 Aurora Knights, and they had managed to slay an ancient white dragon. But this time, their number was more than that by 10 times. The endless ice blades were at the top of physical attacks, and they even contained magical attack power from death and ice magic. Except for Adang, who couldn't feel pain at all, everyone, even Bastion and Omar, had to step backwards. This time, it was the frigid nightmare Lion King's turn to transform into a huge beast and suppress Felix, as he was immune to his fellow frigid nightmare's ice magic. The Lion King, however, quickly discovered that this was completely unnecessary, as Felix had now lost all energy and was injured to the point where he couldn't even move. Roar! The blind spider that had lost its leg pitifully roared in pain. It was no longer a threat. The poison god, the harbinger of so much death, had its body pierced all over repeatedly before it finally collapsed with the ice blades still stuck into its body. Odang transformed into a huge mord devourer and chomped the spider's head in a single bite, delivering the final, fatal blow. When the gigantic spider finally lost its head and collapsed, I received a message from my system. Congratulations to host. You have completed the Slaying a God quest, and your reward is a god equipment. And it was only then that I finally relaxed my incredibly tense mind and immediately cancelled the god's descent. Finally, I was fully satisfied from the feeling of victory, and as I watched Wumian's soul return to the heavens above, I gave up any resistance and sunk into a deep slumber. Congratulations, you did it. After waking up, the first sentence I heard was rather surprising. The next moment, however, all my fatigue instantly vanished, because I recognized the identity of the young seeming person before me. Ayor. The person leaning against the window and gazing outside was precisely the death god Ayor. It was only that this time, he wasn't wearing his signature black robe. The long white robe he was currently donning actually made him resemble a bookish scholar. What did I do? I was still suffering from the backlash of using God's descent. My memories were still a chaotic swirl in my mind, and I had no idea what had happened after I had fallen asleep. Ayer was surprised at my question, but then he chuckled. Felix died. Although it was with the participation of another god, he's still perhaps the first true god to die by a mortal's hand in more than 2,000 years. My memories gradually returned, and I recalled how the poison god was finally surrounded and slain. It was very likely that the entire world was shocked. A true god was slain immediately after ascending. Lorsai would definitely be infuriated. Right, did Lorsai do anything? How did she react? Lorsai is dead. Ayer casually tossed such a tremendous bomb at me. Dead? How did she die? Unlike Felix, Lorsai had descended to the mortal plane using her true body. Although she wouldn't be able to return to her divine country for the time being, a true god in her complete form would definitely possess frightening strength, a completely different level from Felix, who was a fresh new god that had descended into a host's body. Lorsai was a veteran true god with far greater strength than Felix, who in the mortal plane could possibly kill her. It was the abyssal prince Carwin's. Not even Lorsai's corpse remained. Carwin's? Yep. It is highly probable that her double betrayal angered the big shots of both sides. The leaders of chaos wanted to kill her, and nobody on the order side was willing to protect her, so she ended up dying. HMPH. This will scare those who are still undecided and sitting on the fence. Ayer described it so casually, but with a little deduction on my part, I was aware that the death of the two dark elf gods would cause a huge wave. Right. How's the battlefield in the Northlands? What happened to those beastmen in the end? Ask her, she's probably anxious to see you. At this moment, the door suddenly opened, and Elisa entered. Upon seeing me awake, she had an obviously relieved expression. You're finally awake. You've been sleeping for 6 days already. If you didn't wake up soon, I wouldn't have known what to do. 6 days? My chaotic memories must have clouded my mind, as I felt like it was less than a day. Following Elisa was a vast mob of noisy people. And they all had something in common. Your Highness, Her Highness Ren is still missing, and our military reorganization needs you to take charge. The other countries' generals and leaders are requesting that you attend conferences for dealing with the aftermath of the battle, drawing of new borders, the division of the victory loot. All these require your presence. Our Eastern Mist communal country stands to profit greatly this time, but without your presence, we're unable to control the situation. The undead army is currently stationed outside the castle. Thanks to their performance during that battle, they haven't caused a panic, but we need an effective way to communicate with them. The Rhodes Kingdom has mentioned the possibility of them accepting the Church of Law, and their highest ranked priest Xuiti is requesting a personal meeting with you to discuss the specifics. The man with the undead army actually started a contest to see who is the strongest and handsomest. He and Lord Xuiti are currently competing in the finals. Their clothes have all exploded. That scene is too beautiful that I don't even dare to describe it. My lord, you're the only one who can stop them. Before they destroy this entire city, please do something to stop them. Before I could even react, countless chaotic affairs were dumped upon my head, and when I turn around to request for help, I discovered that Ayer had completely vanished. After that, I was instantly overrun by the chatting babble before me, and my sick bed was piled to the top with tasks requiring my immediate attention and various official documents. That's right, Elisa. You guys can go find her, she has my full authority as my representative. Where else was I supposed to find such a good assistant scapegoat? Yet before I could even look in Elisa's direction, that former demon Marchioness, who had anticipated that I would push everything onto her, had also already vanished somewhere. Hey, don't be so heartless. I just woke up, and you want me to do so much already? I wanted to escape, but the attendants and officials around me had already placed their own swords to their necks, a threat that they would kill themselves if I just ignored them. I could only helplessly sigh and take a document as I began the busy work that would make anyone feel powerless. If only that little brat were here. Just where did Ren end up? Carwin should have returned to the Chaos Abyss by now, so why hasn't Ren returned? Is it really true that girls won't return to the nest when they grow up and not care about their fathers anymore? At the exact same time, Ren was exclaiming out loud in shock as well. Where is this? Why am I here? Am I not in the Northlands anymore? In the center of human territory was the Bardi Empire. And on the biggest red light district street in a certain city of this empire, in the most expensive facility named Elven Knight, Ren suddenly woke up while being hugged by many women. She immediately discovered that it was quite crowded around her. Why are there so many women? Achoo! The perfume is too heavy in here. In such a small room, there were a dozen girls that seemed like flowers looking at her, and those women were all looking at her with romantic interest. Some were trying to press their bodies against her while some were even in the midst of removing their clothes. My lord, why did you stop singing? I was waiting for your song. The golden-haired young lady's face was turning red as she said so, and her red face and the look in her eyes revealed the fact that she was seriously in love with Ren. She was looking at Ren as if Ren was her first love. The large snow-white mounds on the blonde girl's chest were even more blinding, and she suddenly wrapped her arms around Ren. Even though they were of the same gender, Ren didn't have much experience in this matter, so her face instantly turned red. Next, however, the women surrounding her said something even more shocking. My lord, do you want more? Let my fellow sisters rest a bit, quite a few of us collapsed last night. While she was refusing on the surface, all the women's red faces and efforts at disrobing revealed their true feelings. Ren was unable to take this any longer. Wait, don't take off your clothes. Hey, why are you all taking off your clothes? I'm a girl as well. Hee, my lord just loves to play these games of pretending to refuse. Of course, we already know that my lord is a woman, but my lord is far better at this than those useless men. Hee, none of us sisters can be without you anymore, and every one of us is waiting for you to purchase our debts. This time, Ren realized she had met with a huge disaster as she looked at those hungry, desire-filled eyes and the pile of snow-white bodies in front of her. And 1 week later, a report was placed in front of me. What? Ren had fun in the Bardi Empire's most luxurious red light district street for half a month, won countless beauties' favor, received the wondrous title of King of 10,000 Flowers, and even agreed to innumerable requests to purchase the women's debts, but in the end, she was penniless, and the red light district has imprisoned her? And now they're requesting us to pay her debts and bail her out? After hesitating a moment, I ended up replying to the Bardi Empire messenger like this: you probably got it wrong. We don't have a man named Ren here. Yep, definitely not. What? She's a woman? Then that's even more impossible since all of us Mist Royalty are normal people. Definitely no perverts at all. Yep, definitely not. I never lie. Chapter 197, Mist Alliance. Chapter 197, Mist Alliance. So that blossoming wild lily one flower, how charismatic she was. How beautiful she sung. How she danced extravagantly like a butterfly. She was the female emperor of the red light district. The dream lover of all men and women. I intentionally hired several bards to sing Ren's recent praises to her for our reunion. Surprisingly, however, Ren had no reaction at all. With bloodshot eyes, she seemed to be in a daze, and the instant after she saw me, her legs gave out and she almost collapsed on the spot. She instantly fell asleep in my arms, and she actually started snoring. All those punishments I had readied for her were wasted. It seemed Ren must have had a tough time, While physical fatigue wouldn't be much for a gold-ranked law knight to cope with, the mental pressure she'd been dealing with must have been significant. After all, since she was a girl, her all-important chastity was now ruined, and it would be difficult for her to get married in the future. Thinking of this, I couldn't help but feel some sympathy and some regret at the punishments I had arranged. After all, this was all Carwin's fault. Otherwise, I could have still tried to explain myself. But now, this already existed: legendary Lilyflower Princess Night Dragon Slaying Chronicles, and she and her 18 flowers published as novels, book reviews, and plays, with a 12% discount for buying in a bundle. Buy 3 at once and you will even receive a free oil painting poster. I'm so sorry. We old guys really overdid it. Thinking of all I had done, I felt even more regret. Brother Roland, Ray doesn't blame you. Hearing the gentle words coming from her as she laid in my arms, I was rather touched, but, so, stop licking my feet, please. Ray knows you like me, but acting like a dog out of love is no good, and also, don't take off your clothes, you're such a pervert. You actually want to wear my clothes? Fine then. If it's roll, it's fine. Stop sniffing. I'm so embarrassed. Stop licking. Are panty pants that wonderful? Directly licking there. My face turned white with anger right then and there. What was with all this? Your Highness, please don't be angry. Her Highness Ren is under the effects of a sweet dream curse from a succubus. These days, she's been pulled into strange dreams, which was why she didn't sleep on her way back at all. It wasn't easy for her to stay awake all this time. A sweet dream curse? What the heck was that? Inferno succubi have the natural talent to magnify a person's innermost desires. With a person's weakness, a succubus can cause their victims to sink into their desires and slowly fall into depravity. For example, a person in love with money would dream about taking a bath in a mountain of gold. A perverted person would dream about having countless beauties at his service. And as for Ren, Carwin's most likely left the curse behind so that she would have a tendency to follow her desires more often. This would cause her to fall more towards the chaos side, and it would make his next descent more convenient. Okay, fine then. As a demon noble, Elisa would naturally know plenty about the chaos abyss. When I heard all this, I laughed out loud with a look of delight on my face. That means Ren's innermost desires are those types of things? That's what she secretly wants the most? My dark history of wearing female clothing? Treating me as some type of pervert with several strange fetishes? It seems that she definitely needs some correcting. No, just the personality correcting fist of justice won't be enough. Let's just brainwash her entirely and reconstruct her personality. At the very least, that dark history definitely can't be left behind. I was filled with smiles as I picked Ren up and walked towards my room. It seemed that I would be rather busy today making preparations for the brainwashing forbidden spell. Her Highness Ren is so pitiful, His Highness Roland must be so furious. His Highness Roland has turned into a darker version of himself. His smile is so scary. I suddenly recalled something as I turned around, flashing a smile at those officials. You guys didn't hear anything today, right? Or should I help you all forget? The both of them shook their heads non-stop in panic. I didn't hear anything. I definitely didn't hear anything. Seeing those two young guys continuously shake their heads, I nodded in satisfaction. Compliance meant that they were obedient children. Naughty children needed to be punished. I chuckled as I glanced at Ren, who was still in my arms. Where should I start from? Oh right, I haven't played mud wrestling or bungee jumping in so long, and the little dark room seems pretty good as well. However, a familiar sound of heavy footsteps along with the roaring of the wind caused me to react by helplessly closing my eyes. Boom. The wall that had just been fixed now had a huge hole in it, and by the side of this huge hole were another 3 newly added human-shaped holes. Boom. Fine. I knew that these guys never knew how to use doors to begin with. Ha ha. You guys, come and catch me. Stop running. Ah dang is the oldest brother. This scene of siblings play fighting before me was rather nostalgic. However, for the older brother dwarf wielding a stone pillar weighing a ton, smashing large holes everywhere, and the younger brother muscleman opening holes in the wall as he pleased, it was something I felt helpless about. From a certain standpoint, they both possessed a very young mental age, and I could understand this type of play behavior, but if they involved me, no matter if it's Omar's brute strength or Adang's huge stone pillar, I'd probably die instantly. Dying because of playing hide and seek with naughty children? That's just too scary to even imagine. And so, I did my best to hide my presence with the full intention of leaving the scene secretly. But that was when I noticed that something was wrong. Wait a moment, where did Adang get that stone pillar from? Why does it look so familiar, like I just saw it a moment ago? But when I recalled it in the next instant, it was already too late. Ah, damned Adang, that's the main pillar of this room. Okay then. The ceiling that was rapidly getting lower and the room that collapsed with a boom had already given me my answer. The Beastman King Ammon Bloodox has died? In a way, this result was completely within my expectations. Before I lost consciousness, the situation had turned around and the Beastmen from the High Plains were once again forced into a dire situation. They had acted as the other Beastmen's reinforcements yet were completely blocked off by the underground and undead armies. And when they discovered that even a true god was about to perish and that the human reinforcements were getting stronger and stronger, the beastmen from the plains, who had suffered a bitter defeat 1 year earlier, wisely chose to retreat. When the plains beastmen leader Carodian retreated together with all the beastmen tribes of the plains, the fortunate survivors among the plateau beastmen from that long bloody night discovered, to their astonishment, that they had actually lost all of their allies, while, unbeknownst to them, their opponent's strength had multiplied by several folds. We definitely can't allow Felix to die here. Otherwise, we'll all die. Even the seemingly undefeatable true god was now in such peril after descending, so the remaining beastmen were all forced back to the battlefield. They knew that the deep grudges held against them by the other species could never be paid back except in blood. When faced with the humans of the Northlands, the Ziluo undead, the Grey Blood Elves, and the allied underground armies, they had zero chance of victory. They were trying to avoid unnecessary losses since the very start, and they had retreated to the outside of Felix's divine domain. When they finally started moving to help save Felix, they first had to deal with the interference of the allied armies of the underground and the undead. Moreover, the reinforcements of Ziluo and the underground were all fresh armies that were well prepared for battle. It was only natural that the beastmen's attempts at helping Felix were blocked. And when Felix had finally been pushed to the brink and had perished, part of the beastmen had chosen to put down their weapons and surrender, while Ammon Bloodox and the few remaining beastmen tribe leaders had unhesitatingly chose to fight to the death. They were aware of the fact that as the perpetrators of this invasion and the primary warmongers behind it all, they would definitely be executed if they failed in battle. In that case, they preferred to gloriously die in battle rather than be humiliatingly hung in public. And that was how Ammon's head became the trophy of some young soldier, and the Beastmen army, which had been in such a fervor, finally ended up annihilated, with all the remaining beastmen either dead or having surrendered. With Ammon Bloodox's huge tribal flag finally fallen, the largest southern beastmen invasion in more than 200 years had finally officially failed. Even if the humans didn't go exterminate the plateau beastmen completely, they would need at least 1 or 200 years to recover their strength. Perhaps they had zero hope left in this holy war, since without a guardian god, they would only grow weaker. And to tell the truth, the beastmen weren't the only species that suffered massive losses, nor were they the ones who lost the most. The biggest losers were the Dark Elves that basically had no relations originally to the Beastmen. For the past several thousand years, Lorsai had been leading the Dark Elves in surviving in the underground, and their worldview, which used to be the same as the upper-ranked elves of the Elven Empire, had long since been distorted beyond recognition. Everything in the Dark Elves society, from their culture and religion to their social structure and atmosphere, had been branded with Lorsai's personal influence. It could be said that most Dark Elves were basically the personal property of Lorsai. Just like how the humans above ground couldn't imagine life without the sun, the Dark Elves were utterly unable to imagine life without Lorsai. However, now that Lorsai was dead, Lorsai's priests and matriarchs that were at the top of Dark Elf society all suffered heavily in a single night. They either simply died on the spot or went insane, with the best result being a loss of all their power. In the cruel Dark Elf world, weakness was the greatest sin, and since the weakest were those Lorsai priests and matriarchs who were originally at the top, there was nothing but an even more pitiful end waiting for them. In a single night, When Lorsai's death was proven by the loss of power of all her priests, 90% of the underground cities within Lorsai's domain fell into riots. The entire Dark Elf society sunk into chaos. And the most dangerous part of it all wasn't simply the rioting society. Lorsai had always been the highest and most venerated existence for the majority of Dark Elves, and her will was what this entire species strove to imitate and follow as law. Families would slaughter each other all for the Spider Queen's favor. The entire Dark Elf species had been living for Lorsai's personal benefit. Yet now she ended up perishing. For the Dark Elves that viewed her as all-important, this was no different than the collapsing of the sky. The empty hole left by their former belief system's breakdown was the true trouble for them. The collapse of their belief system gave rise to fearless criminals, while others chose to commit suicide. Most of them, however, instinctively went searching for a new existence to replace Lorsai. In a single night, countless new belief systems of gods, false gods, and evil gods alike appeared, and several existences that had the potential to ascend to godhood all locked their eyes on targeting the divine obligation that Lorsai left behind. Actually, the law god Woomians moved rather quickly, and the silver-masked enforcers of justice were efficiently recovering order in each underground elven city at high speed. Of course, there was plenty of military might from Sulphur Mountain City involved. At the very least, the red hunting hounds that had left the underground were very effective at this. If the current situation had been allowed to develop, before a new Dark Elf true god could be born, the entire species would probably collapse on itself and be swallowed by various factions. Of course, the one who would get the greatest slice would definitely be the most powerful person of the underground, any. At the very least, the Church of Law that helped recover order in each city and bring judgment upon criminals and rioters was already becoming more and more welcomed by the Dark Elves. Perhaps, before long, the new order in the Dark Elf society would astonish the world. It wasn't that the other true gods didn't want to interfere, but this had been a battle between the Dark Elf gods and the Law god in a way, and now the victor Woomians was claiming the spoils of victory. Of course the other true gods were unable to interfere. In just half a month, not only did Woomians recover the divine power he had used for the god's descent, but due to the rapid expansion of his believer base and the Law god's area of influence, Woomians even began the path of promoting in rank. If, through all this, he could successfully overtake Lorsai's entire territory, then he might even end up as a middle god like Lorsai. In fact, Woomians was even beginning to consider setting up a follower god just like Lorsai had done with Felix, in order to take over the divine obligation of guardian god of the Dark Elves. If this were a peaceful era, the path from a potential god to a low god to a middle god would be an incredibly difficult path. A true god would typically require several thousand years of accumulated guardianship to increase in rank, but this was the time of the Holy War, which was a great opportunity for the true gods. In every holy war, there would be countless new gods arising and old gods dying. It no longer mattered who was doing good. The one who could laugh in the end would be the true victor. I gave all the mundane tasks of the Church of Law over to Xuiti and Lilith too with the intention of doing zero management of it myself, but since Roland had successfully pulled off a god's descent, and didn't even die because of it, I was now solidly viewed as a divine messenger, and all the members of the Church of Law now viewed me with fervor in their eyes, causing me to recall the past from Woomians' generation. But right now, I didn't have time to pay attention to any of these things, as a bigger trouble was already in front of me. Today, the main point of our discussion is about saving the Northern Elves. Right now, they're suffering from continuous natural calamities, with constant hailstorms and blizzards, and I heard they even had an ice hurricane a few days ago. Not to mention that they lack food and clothing for winter, and there's even a few crazed Dark Elves rioting there. If we just sit on our hands and ignore the situation, then the Northern Elves will likely go extinct. However, nothing but silence greeted my words. It was obvious that every country's leaders and generals significantly lacked interest in this topic. After all, each country had suffered many losses in this battle, and the elves were constantly changing sides. They were on the enemy's side for most of the time. Many people here had grudges against them. It was only national that they wouldn't be willing to help save the elves now. I chuckled at seeing this situation. Alright, if you guys won't help them, I will. Hearing this, The leaders all had expressions of surprise. This time, the Slower Kingdom should have the biggest grudge against the elves out of anyone, which meant my people of the Mist. Even though I had a good reputation on the surface, everyone knew that in truth I was depicted just like an Armageddon-bringing demon king. I definitely didn't seem the type who would have no personal considerations and repay evil with kindness. Yep, I've had my eyes on Tassel City for a long time now. Their library, which has been maintained for over 10,000 years, has countless Elven Empire magical tomes and priceless artwork that shouldn't be lost to this calamity. My explanation caused everyone to instantly understand. I wasn't going there to save the elves, I was basically going there to steal the elves' belongings, just like a looter. However, many were thinking that I could have done all this in secret. Why did I tell them about it? Just what was this living legend thinking and planning on doing? And why did he bring this topic up right here and now? There was a moment of silence in the conference room. The only sound was the tapping of my index finger. The Holy War has already begun, and the entire continent will soon be dragged into it. There were many fortunate factors involved in us managing to deal with the first battle, but the next time may not involve a true God's descent. We need many external reinforcements to help us, so to deal with the ongoing Holy War, I intend to create an alliance in the Northlands, the Mist Alliance. First, the Mist Alliance will follow the principles of non-aggression. We will never be the first to declare war or start a battle with the intention of invading others' territory, and we will follow the Church of Law and Woomians, the guardian god of the Northlands. Nobody here needs to worry that this Mist Alliance will be a threat to any of your countries. Under the conditions of the alliance, each country has their own independent rights and won't be allowed to interfere in other countries' internal politics. This shall be the foundation. Also, as per Woomians' Church of Law, unless someone commits a crime, each race in and of itself is guiltless and non-evil, which is why this Mist Alliance won't limit the races and countries that can enter. As far as I know, some remnants from Ziluo, some underground residents that prefer the sun, the half-beastmen from the Shaw and Free States, the Barbarian Tribes Alliance, the Eastern Mist Communal Country, and the Slower Kingdom have all already applied to join the Mist Alliance. Hearing this, all those present were incredibly shocked. This was not even at the level of out of the ordinary anymore. To hook up with so many non-human species, it wouldn't surprise any of them if the gods descend and call for the following battle of the Holy War on the very next day. But if this Mist Alliance could truly be built, each of them couldn't help but shiver when they imagined it. Perhaps, if it really could happen, with so many powerful factions allying together, the entire Northlands would be under their solid grasp. Woomians would truly become the guardian god of the Northlands. Without a doubt, the Mist Alliance was a military and political megaton bomb for them, and each of them felt they had to seriously consider the effects of its creation. From a certain perspective, this holy war had also acted as a melting pot, with many races that bore grudges against each other finally having communication and learning more about each other. It helped this gigantic alliance begin its path to realization. This doesn't seem appropriate. What about the Holy Church? Hee hee. I chuckled when I heard this, before I continued my explanation with a serious expression. Marquis Sash of the Rhodes Kingdom, have you still not recognized the situation? It's already the time of the Holy War, and we northern barbarians can't rely on anyone else. If we don't help warm each other, then how else will we survive this bitter winter? Marquis Sash still seemed like he wanted to say something, but I shook my head. I know what you want to say. Relax. Soon, when the fires of battle appear across the lands, the Holy Church won't even be able to deal with their own affairs. Besides, this is also the will of Woomians. As a true god on the Order side, do you really think that he would do anything heretical? We're only pitiful people trying to help each other stay warm, and the Mist Alliance will definitely never invade anyone else first. But are we Northerners supposed to not even have the right to survive in peace? After some hesitation, Marquis Sash finally decided to not say anything, but, for me, this was just the beginning. The only legal successor of the Tassel Kingdom, Princess Suana, has also applied to join the Mist Alliance. After we help save the elves, perhaps the Northern Elves will also become part of the Mist Alliance. All the generals sitting here in the conference room were shocked at my words. I said it quite frankly that it was obvious I intended to take over the entire elven species, and they were astonished at my ambition. Which is why I hope each country present here can consider joining this Mist Alliance and help save the elves. I shall open up channels to share technology among all the member countries of the Mist Alliance, including the magic sword casters and floating airships from the last battle. This time, each elven kingdom suffered calamitous damage, and all their main military forces were annihilated, so perhaps there might not even be a northern elf kingdom in the future. It's not that bad of an idea for the elves to simply live as citizens of various countries, is it? Benefits were the most practical method of political discussions between countries. The allure of the Mist Kingdom's newest technology coupled with the generations-old esoteric elven secrets proved to be exceedingly difficult to withstand. There would be no second chance for them if they missed this opportunity. Without a doubt, this imitation was the most effective type of bait. I turn around to leave right after saying this. I had already finished what I had to say, and if I didn't do a good job in helping save the elves, Suano would haunt me again in the middle of the night. And, as my most trusted right-hand subcommander, Elisa was already patiently waiting at the door for me. Aren't you afraid that you're forcing them too much, and that they'll struggle with all their might? Relax, nobody here is an idiot. With the Holy War having begun, those mega-level empires won't have any time to pay attention to this area. If small countries want to survive, now's the golden time for them to be carried on someone else's back. And this time, the back that I showed them looks so comforting and reliable. Once they think through this situation, they'll be jumping on me in droves. Sexual harassment. Elisa adjusted her glasses and changed the topic in a rather strange direction. But a servant suddenly walked past me and handed me a slip of paper with a note written on it. In 2 hours, I hope to have a private meeting with you, Ashjunder. Haha, see, the first person that wants to be carried by me is already here. Note 1. For those that read Asian novels and still don't know yet, Lily is a reference to girl x girl love in Asian culture. 2. We're going to be using Lilith instead of Lily, the Lily from Sulphur Mountain City, for those who don't remember. Chapter 198, the continuation of Sleeping Beauty. Actually, I had been thinking about creating the Mist Alliance for a long time already. It would be an alliance with a mutual goal, and each country would worship the law god. Each state would have a similar legal system and would obey the premise of non-aggression to create a relatively peaceful area in the Northlands. Yes, it would only be an alliance, not some legendary kingdom, and definitely not an empire. I had no intention of reigning over others and declaring myself emperor in the borderlands or anything like that. In fact, I didn't even intend to be the leader of any faction. I want to reduce the scale of this holy war and the death it will cause as much as possible. I want to gather more power and be able to survive this dangerous war. My primary goal had never changed, and after all this perseverance, I seem to have begun getting results. First, one of the most important members of the Foundation, Wurmians, increased in strength. While this may not seem like a big deal, in my plan to break the cycle of reincarnation, unless Wurmians reached the level of a main god of order, the rest of my plans would be nothing but empty words. Only making this boss behind my back become stronger could help me survive at least a single blow from any veteran god who decided they didn't like me. In a way, Wurmians was the true victor of this battle. He obtained his own Hall of Valhalla and cycle of reincarnation, as well as the Northlands. From now on, he had his own territory, and he was no longer considered to be among the ranks of the third-rate gods, false gods, and evil gods. Currently, Wurmians was leveling up from a low god to a middle god. His divine obligation included law, contracts, and the guardianship of the Northlands, but he still hadn't yet obtained a complete divine obligation. The concepts of law and contracts were both new to this world, and contracts had only begun to popularize themselves in Alland. Although I felt that contracts had endless potential, there were too few users and believers, so Wurmians hadn't received enough power from this source yet. It was still merely a potential source of power in the future. And while the power of the law had even greater potential, Sulphur Mountain City was still the place where it was most popular. About the entire city was filled with believers, and this was only the result of me working hard for more than a century. While there were now quite a few believers in the underground, as well as the small Eastern Mist communal country. The time had still been too short. Most believers were rather shallow in their beliefs and only understood the surface of the concept of law, so they couldn't provide much faith power to Woomians. But the guardian god of the Northlands was something else entirely. As long as the guardian god protected this species and this area, even non-believers would be protected by him. Those various prayers mixed with gratitude could also give Woomians a large amount of faith power, and this time, Woomians even personally performed a god's descent. This divine miracle that everyone could see was far more convincing than anything else. Perhaps the miracle of the Northlands guardian god's descent would soon be known by everyone in the entire Northlands, and the other northern countries would support the Church of Law and provide additional faith for Woomians in two different divine obligation areas, guardianship and law. To almost reach the rank of a middle god in less than 2 years after becoming a god was unbelievable. This sides of both order and chaos were probably paying attention to Woomians now, but being at the center of attention means either becoming cannon fodder or getting slapped to death in a single strike. It's obviously not a good thing. It seems that it's time to lay low for the time being. I definitely wasn't hoping for the appreciation of the veteran order gods. With their praise like with great power comes great responsibilities, I would be sent to the front lines as mere cannon fodder. And nor did I wish for the chaos side to treat me as a thorn in their side to be removed early on. Since the battling here has stopped already, then we should be able to have a few days of peace. Hey, it's time to let loose and relax a little. Thinking about this, I couldn't help but smile. All this tiring fighting was in order to have a peaceful, flourishing place where everyone could live happily after all. However, thinking about what I was worried about earlier changed my smile of satisfaction into a helpless wry smile. I'm developing too fast. Even if Ayer is protecting me, I still need to be careful. It's easy for a main god to protect a low god who doesn't even have his own territory, since there basically won't be any clash of personal interests, but now, Woomians intends to take over the entire Northlands, which basically means becoming independent. Speedy development without a solid foundation will definitely make others red-eyed with jealousy. Those true gods of order may not be all that powerful in a direct confrontation, but they're experts at underhanded plots and backstabbing. After all, they just had over 2,000 years of internal conflict, and quite a few of their veterans died without even knowing what hit them. But the non-aggression principle is an excellent excuse. Since we will never be the first to declare battle against anyone, it's, of course, impossible for us to become cannon fodder. Then, unless an enemy comes to us. Yep, right now, we should focus on improving our defense, and we shouldn't blindly focus on increasing our territory, which will give the other true gods and major countries an excuse, at least until the arrival of the undead calamity. The Mist Alliance countries will be limited only to the Northlands countries. This should at least make the mega-level human empires less concerned. Of course, I knew that it was impossible to make a tiger change its diet and become a vegetarian. I knew that, at the very least, all and San Antonio had their eyes on the Northlands long since, but as long as I succeeded in stalling them for a few years, they would probably no longer have the time to think about us anymore. So, the next catastrophe will be the undead calamity? I wonder if it will happen earlier or later. The internal strife of the Ziluo Empire had never resolved their foundational problem. The undead lords that had escaped to the undead plane would definitely affect the undead emperors there. As long as the undead emperors still wanted to return to the mortal plane, with the increase in the elemental tide, the undead plane's invasion was likely inevitable. The only part where I could relax a little about it was that the undead calamity was unlikely to focus on the Northlands, since the land here was wide with the people sparse. It definitely wouldn't be as attractive to the undead emperors as the densely populated human centers in the middle of the continent. If I was the commander of the undead army, my first target would be to ambush the San Antonio Empire and the Bardi Empire, and I would conquer the cities that had the highest populations immediately in order to cast undead calamity and death plague. Cough, cough. I accidentally got carried away. Problem of occupation. But I was confident of my own expert level prediction, since I had been an undead emperor in the past as well, and my prediction was the same as past undead invasions in history. If the undead army wanted to become stronger, It was necessary to snowball their source of undead soldiers as much as possible, which meant that they had to first conquer those major countries with long histories and resurrect their graveyard's strongest legendary heroes as the undead army's main forces. They would have to use the commoners' skeletons as cannon fodder and create countless amounts of new soldiers from battles. Whoops, I accidentally got too excited again. When the undead truly begins their invasion, probably the undead under my command will be viewed in a different light as well. Perhaps I should create a preemptive mood and change their brand, giving them a new name and a new organization so that at least people know they aren't those crazed, bloodthirsty undead. Imperceptibly, the undead under my command kept increasing, with the remnants from Zayuo that Omar had brought back, my red hunting hound squad, and the undead originally present in Sulphur Mountain City. Anubis squad? It seems that this world doesn't have a dog-headed god by this name, although it's regrettable for dog-head lovers. I'm going to have to reject this name. The Forgotten? This sounds plagiarized, and I'll probably have to constantly explain what was forgotten. Rejected. Undead rock and roll. Something strange seems to have gotten mixed up in here. Rejected. Guards of Hell? This sounds pretty nice, although it does seem a bit ostentatious. I still feel like it's lacking something. How about I combine it with my previous idea, Dog-Headed Guards of Hell? Yep, this sounds harmonious and interesting. And we can use Bastian's face as the emblem, and even give him a dog head helmet. Ah, I like it more and more already. I'm a genius at naming. I was getting delighted and was talking to myself with a constantly increasing volume. My lord, please don't, otherwise Bastian and everyone will cry. The familiar confused voice belonged to the silver-masked Lilith Milan who appeared before me. Earlier, she had been in charge of work at Definder, but after the battle, she had returned here as well. Just like how a certain naked Taran had exposed his own identity in the Shaw and Free States where no other Taran lived, my identity was known by the people who knew me originally. Of course, some things were better left unsaid, with no need to directly ask, but I figured that the four heavenly kings of law probably knew my identity already as well. Currently, however, Lilith wasn't in the mood to reminisce about the past. It was, of course, a joyous occasion for an old friend to meet an old boss, but hearing such words right from the start, which might end up with all the future Northlands undead having the nickname of Dogheads, was something not joyous at all. And according to her understanding of Roland, if this Doghead title was finalized, it would probably be incredibly difficult to get it changed. Yet just voicing her opposition wasn't enough, so Lilith could only rack her brains and try to come up with a better name. How about the Guiltless? It indicates their foundational differences from normal undead as well as represents how they choose to stand under the protection of the law god and that they're guiltless citizens who choose to obey the law. I was hesitating whether or not to accept her idea. Yep, I was just simply considering the advantages and disadvantages of these names from a logical standpoint. It definitely wasn't because I felt that a dog head emblem seemed really cool, and nor was it because I thought that seeing an undead army all wearing dog head helmets would be really funny. I definitely wasn't biased at all. Lilith seemed to discover I was hesitating and mulled it over before apparently coming to an epiphany as she added another few sentences. Even if you call them the Guiltless, they can still use a dog head emblem and the dog head helmets. We can even make Bastian into their entire species mascot. As the leader of the Red Hunting Hound squad, he should be delighted. Okay, nice idea. That's what it'll be then. Lilith mentally apologized to Bastian who was about to become a mascot as she inwardly heaving a sigh of relief. After all, in a way, she herself would also be a member of the Guiltless. As a female who loved beauty, it would be too difficult for her to be called something like a doghead. But right when she was starting to relax, she heard a nostalgic name. Fina? Isn't this my cute little Fina? Amelia actually ran over here with an expression filled with surprise and joy, waving her hand as she rushed to us. It was quite rare to see her so happy, as her typical expression was grim and dark. However, Lilith's expression rapidly flickered between surprise, disbelief, anger, and helplessness. After having known her for so long, this was the first time I discovered that she had such acting talent with the many different expressions she could pull off. You guys know each other? Fina? Lilith, is this your real name? I recalled that Lilith had come to Sulphur Mountain City by herself. Every Blood Tribe member with no family would likely have some unpleasant memories, so abandoning her original name would be perfectly normal. My lord, there's no Phenom Milan here, only Lilith Milan. All of Lilith's emotions finally quieted down as she spoke with only a calm expression, while Amelia still retained her expression of surprise and delight as she hugged Lilith. Phena, just where did you run off to? I've been looking for you all this time. Aunt Amelia, please don't call me Phena anymore. I am Lilith Milan. Phena Milan disappeared from this world a long time ago. Stop being so silly. No matter what, you used to be the female emperor of the Bardi Empire, my cutest and youngest niece. I discovered for the first time that actually both of them had the surname of Milan, and they actually resembled each other in physical appearance. It seemed they were relatives. And so, I pulled over a chair, sat down, did my best to erase my presence, and prepared to watch a good show. And through their words of astonishment, I rapidly figured out the incredibly tangled relationship between the two of them. Well, it was tangled because of how Lilith viewed Amelia. Amelia was simply happy to see her youngest niece who she hadn't seen in so many years. And the story of their past was truly extraordinary. That ridiculous Sleeping Beauty story actually has a continuation in this world? Yes, Amelia was the evil witch in the story, and the Lilith Milan before me was the female lead of that very Sleeping Beauty story that ruined my childhood, Phena Milan. Okay, Lilith, relax. Your aunt has already championed your cause. I tossed that ungrateful fickle man into a special plant garden, and he probably turned into fertilizer long ago. Sigh, I thought that since the corpse-loving prince wouldn't be interested in normal women, he definitely wouldn't be a playboy or a liar and at least be a good person. It's all your aunt's fault for not seeing through him. HMPH, Lilith, now you'll believe me, won't you? Your aunt is absolutely correct. There's not a single good man in this world. Fine, she even viciously glared at me while saying this for no apparent reason. I'm innocent. I swear. At the very least, I was able to get a clear view of the picture through their discussion. So, the true story of Sleeping Beauty wasn't all that romantic at all. The prince from another country, who was actually a necrophile, woke up the Sleeping Beauty, and the willful witch's curse was broken. However, the following developments weren't like a fairy tale at all. When Lilith's father, the king, saw his daughter wake up, he was incredibly overjoyed, and he even believed this to be something like a legendary kiss of true love. He delightedly deluded himself into believing that his daughter had discovered her true love, so he betrothed Lilith, who was still confused and didn't know what was going on, to that prince. Since that prince from another country wasn't in the line to directly inherit the throne in his country, he unhesitatingly agreed to marry the Bardi Emperor's only daughter, who would be the future empress herself. The following was where the story completely derailed from the usual plot of a fairy tale. The prince, who had a rather unique personality, had no interest whatsoever in his newlywed wife, and instead spent all his time in the graveyards, until finally the prince, who had studied undead magic before, decided to turn his wife into what he loved the most. And so, he used the curse of the Blood Tribe on her, turning Lilith into a living corpse, and he also tried to use evil necromancy magic to enslave her. But he didn't expect that Princess Lilith was also an excellent swordswoman, which coincidentally helped her to transform into a Blood Tribe noble who maintained her intelligence. And so, in the royal palace, the two of them had a fierce battle, until the Bardi Empire's holy knights and priests arrived in time and exorcised the evil Queen Emperor who bathed herself in evil magic in order to remain forever young. In the end, the scandal was hushed up, and that prince became the emperor. But, according to Amelia's story, he didn't get to be emperor for very long, because the furious witch discovered this plot when she returned to visit her relatives and finally transformed the prince into fertilizer for her garden. Evil was punished and justice was served. It was a classic fairy tale with a happy ending. Congratulations, my condolences, congratulations. To hell with your congratulations. No matter how you look at it, this is all your fault, Roland. What? I took yet another unexpected blow. I obviously had no connection to this story whatsoever. Back then during the time it took place, I was busy searching the world for clues for my revenge. How could I possibly have anything to do with it? If it weren't for your betrayal, causing me to lose trust in men. How could I possibly set such a strict test in order to assess Lilith's future husband? And in the end, such a pervert was the one who passed, harming Lilith to be befallen with such a terrible fate. In the end, all of this is your fault. I was instantly rendered speechless. It wasn't that I was unable to retort, I was angered to the point of not knowing what to say. Even this can be counted as my fault? Then I might as well be the root of all evil. Aunt Amelia, there's no need to blame Lord Roland. I just had a tough life. Hey, I'm over it now. Men are all ugly and untrustworthy. I only like women now. The me from that time was so foolish. Okay then. So the legendary rumor that some people could change their sexual orientation after meeting with a huge romantic setback is true after all. But when Amelia heard her niece declare that she was now a lesbian, she took 2 steps back, and her face paled. It seemed that she must have been a lot purer on the inside than what she appeared on the outside. But I immediately discovered that I was wrong in my understanding, as Amelia actually started bawling out loudly. Why, my poor little Fina. It's all your aunt's fault. Even if that bastard is dead already, your aunt will definitely find that bastard's undead teacher for you. Why, it's all that bastard teacher's fault, saying something like don't mind what others think of you, and work your hardest at seeking true love. If the one you love doesn't meet your standards, you can try using your own way to change her and accept her. That undead mage teacher, who didn't take any responsibility for teaching as he pleased, is the true culprit. Hearing her angry roar, I instantly dropped all the snacks I was eating onto the ground. Why did this phrase sound so modern and so familiar? It sounded exactly like a sentence I read in a Chicken Soup for the Soul on Earth. Could it be that it was popular in this world as well? A prince? Back then, in order to obtain more information for my revenge, I did take in several disciples from powerful families, including Suana's father, and I think there was a person from Somme. Could he have been? Roland told me this exact phrase before as well. He was encouraging me to follow my heart and seek true love, which was how I worked up my courage and determination and started discarding my bias in order to find my new happiness. Is this a popular phrase? Was it said by someone famous? Lilith's expression was filled with surprise, but Amelia had her head lowered as she mumbled, I knew it, only he. She suddenly turned around and started laughing insanely at me. Hey, it was indeed said by someone famous, but soon, it'll become the crazed words of a dead man. As expected, you're the only person who could possibly be the culprit behind it all. There was a bestial look in her blood-red eyes, and her green hair was growing at a furious pace. Her killing intent and anger was exploding to the point where even the ground was trembling from her frightening power. I knew those so-called logical-seeming Chicken Soup for the Soul books were completely unreliable. Following its advice can only lead to problems. Amelia, don't hit my face. I still have to go to a conference in a bit. Chapter 199, Descendant. The Mist Alliance. With the birth of this new faction, some things needed to be settled. And this was designating tactical combat areas and dividing the land of the Mist Alliance into several districts. If this wasn't drawn up immediately, there would probably be endless internal squabbles about it. The first to be decided was the location of the headquarters, or perhaps I should call it the capital. There were quite a few choices. Definder and Aunt Yuan were both excellent candidates. The former was the law god Wumian's holy ground, the crimeless capital. It was also very appropriate for the law god's special characteristics, and it could definitely serve as the new capital. At the very least, if it was chosen as the capital, I wouldn't have to worry about the citizens' popular support or how to defend the place. Just try attacking the law god's holy ground. There will be ability users in law classes awaiting you with powers magnified by several folds, and perhaps even Wumians himself will descend to the mortal plane and deal with you. If Definder was the capital, it would be almost impossible for others to attack it, which was quite attractive. Especially from a personal standpoint, I also hoped that Definder would be able to rapidly rebuild itself with the Mist Alliance's resources and become the glorious northern city it was in the past, but obviously Definder wasn't the best choice for a capital. As for the latter choice, Anchuan, it was the largest city in the entire Northlands. Business and engineering were both highly developed here, and thanks to a certain person's surrender, This city was mostly spared from the fires of war. Relatively little investment would help this city flourish again. With a rise in political status, this long-famed business capital would surely improve, using its already well-oiled merchant and business trade systems. Add the no-tariff policy between the Mist Alliance member countries and Antuan would likely become a business metropolis in the future. Even though there were many advantages to these two locations, in the end, I could only helplessly abandon both cities as options for becoming the capital of the Mist Alliance. I ended up choosing Red Maple City. Yep, I chose this ruined city that was nothing but devastated rubbish. This was originally only a second-tier city in the Sleweaver Kingdom to begin with its most famous site being the Battle History Museum. After this battle, perhaps the Battle History Museum would vastly improve its collection. After over 2 months of fighting plus the cruel guerrilla warfare that had taken place within the city itself, with even 2 gods descending upon this place, calling this city devastated rubbish was already praising it. Making this location into the capital was basically no different to creating a capital on empty land, but in the end, I still chose Red Maple City. Why? This was the only appropriate location. Even though the Mist Alliance would, of course, have the people of the Mist at the center, its final goal was to create a non-aggression alliance involving numerous species and many countries. If I chose Antuan or Definder as the capital, which was either the Eastern Mist communal countries or Sleweaver Kingdom's capital to begin with, it would seem too politically biased. This would only result in the other countries having reservations about joining the Mist Alliance, and it wouldn't be helpful for the people of the Mist and the other species to live among each other with equality. And so, I could only abandon these two so tempting choices as a capital city. Politically speaking, choosing this main battlefield location in the Northlands, where various races and various countries allied together to resist against the invaders, would at least give those who participated in battle a sense of intimacy about the place. Perhaps it would even give the other countries the impression that the Mist Alliance would exist as a separate entity, and that there wouldn't be too much backlash against joining the Mist Alliance. Accomplishing that would be my greatest political victory. Of course, since Sleweaver Kingdom and Eastern Mist communal country with the people of the Mist constituted the foundation of the Mist Alliance, it was, of course, impossible for the other countries to gain a complete independence, but at the very least it had to appear so on the surface. However, even if I set Red Maple City as the capital, I wouldn't abandon Antuan and Definder. Definder, which was almost impossible to attack, may be relatively out of the way and poorer, but it could definitely become a logistical as well as military and technology center. And, its special status as the crimeless city would help it become the headquarters of the Church of Law as well as act like Sulphur Mountain City in the past and create an example of a place where many races could live together in peace, attracting more believers to the Church of Law. As for Sleweaver's Antuan, just letting it continue to develop as a business center was plenty. Of course, I still had a series of plans, but I'll talk about those some other time. From the current development of Definder in the south, Red Maple City in the center, and Antuan in the north, I could already expect that they would become 3 major cities of the lifeline of the Mist Alliance. In fact, I was even beginning to consider creating scheduled floating airship transports between each city, since these 3 locations would be the first to become the people of the Mist Dreamland. The already destroyed Mist Kingdom was beginning to revive itself in this way. Of course, ideas were beautiful but reality was always cruel. My plan was for 10 years later, and the current Red Maple City before me was nothing but a pile of rubble. Today, while the entire city was still bathed in the afterglow of joy from victory, in a certain 3-story building that remained standing in Red Maple City, there were guards and hidden sentries posted everywhere. They were only 3 to 5 steps away from each other, and this building was heavily guarded. This used to be a place that Red Maple City had given the Eastern Mist people to live, but now, it was given over to Olive, Demlet, Amelia, and the other skilled technicians as a logistical and research base. Intermittent explosions and sounds of agony kept sounding out from this place along with even the occasional large fire or mushroom cloud, and this why most citizens treated this place like the plague and didn't dare approach it, even though it was relatively peaceful now after the battle. There was a reason for the current heavy guard on this place. An incredibly significant surgery was occurring, and all the characters involved were very important. No accidents would be permitted. And since Amelia was the surgeon, it wouldn't be wrong to describe this as an experiment, either. The large and spacious room was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. There were no unnecessary people in this empty room. Even if this surgery's difficulty level was rather high, Amelia still trusted her own trained tentacle vine assistants rather than newbie assistants that would make many mistakes. This was a classic witch's room, with voodoo dolls, scarecrows, live lizards in glass jars, various strange drawings that made people think of vicious magical curses, and of course, it had a huge medicinal cauldron, which was basically the hallmark of a witch. Strange magical runes were etched onto that pitch-black cauldron, and the thick black liquid within it emanated a revolting stench that was almost impossible to withstand. The things floating on top were even more disgusting. There were dead cats, some dark green herbs, a strange assortment of gems, and living plants that were still shrieking in agony. Perhaps not a single person in this world would want to drink a single sip of this broth. At the current moment, Amelia, who was all raring to go, wasn't using her typical tools. She was instead using a precision saw to saw away at some mysterious unidentifiable green creature. I finally finished it. Amelia breathed a sigh of relief as she put down the precision saw. She had finally managed to slice off a bloody hunk of light green flesh. She then immediately proceeded to toss that piece of flesh, which was still bleeding green blood, straight into the cauldron, causing a green mist to arise. A potted plant sitting close by the cauldron instantly withered to death. Hey, this isn't right. Isn't this clearly some toxic poison? Hey, Amelia, just what are you intending to do? Didn't I ask you for a surgery? What are you doing here creating a toxic poison? As the person currently undergoing this surgery, I felt endlessly regret for my decision. However, I had been injected with a large amount of numbing medicine and had a paralysis spell, with the strength to paralyze even a winter wolf, cast on me. I couldn't feel anything at all below my neck. That was why even though I felt that something was off about Amelia's actions, I could only lie on the bed and not move even an inch. I was only able to shout at the top of my lungs, full of regret. I should have gone to find Margaret. Damn it, where did they run off to now? Hey, Amelia, how could these things possibly have anything to do with the surgery I requested? You surely don't intend to take revenge on me with this opportunity, do you? When I saw how the witch was foolishly grinning as she used that saw to stir the contents of the cauldron, my suspicions were stoked even further. After all, I seriously infuriated Amelia and Lily not too long ago. After the matter, I had immediately apologized as sincerely as I could, and I even wrote a 300-page essay on why that perverted prince's actions had no connection to me whatsoever. But sometimes women wouldn't see anything in their rage and would only look at the result they desired. At times like these, talking reason would actually be illogical. But I was still in a better situation than someone else, since, at the very least, I could move my head after being numbed and paralyzed. The other person to receive this surgery was laying by my side, and she couldn't even move her head. Gleena, was chained and tied up tightly. Her always fearless eyes were now filled with terror, and sounds of whining could be heard from her tightly gagged mouth. Even though she was struggling, I knew that she definitely wouldn't be able to break free. Why did I know? Because I was the one who tied her up. I did it at the time just to prevent her from escaping, which was why I used special tying techniques and an especially strong rope. Who knew that I would soon be in the same situation? By the way, even though this method of tying was supposed to be the best way to accentuate the breasts, she was still just as flat as always. Whoa. Her face was filled with rage as she seemed to detect the regret and pity in my eyes, but right after that she suddenly began to blink rapidly. Judging from how she pointed her gaze somewhere down on her body, she seemed to want me to look there as well, but just a single look startled me greatly. You want me to look below your waist? What are you lifting up? A red wire. You actually put explosives there. You're not afraid of exploding yourself to death? As expected of a natural-born explosives maniac. Under her long lace skirt, An array of yellow explosives was actually tied to her snow-white legs. A veritable armory of dangerous explosives lay under her skirt. As the queen of a country, Glina was rather outlandish in her own way. She still spent most of her energy in her favorite hobby, creating new explosives. However, the maids and officials in the palace wouldn't allow the queen to play with explosives every day, but she would never listen to reason as she lacked a feeling of safety without explosives. This was why she decided to simply hide the explosives in an obvious location. Nobody would, of course, dare touch her. You mean I should pull the wire and activate the small bomb? Explode through the ropes? Glina nodded continuously. She was trying her utmost to lift her skirt, and she kept staring at the smallest explosive tied to her body, which was the explosive with only a tiny amount of power, perfect for this situation. 3 mandrake grasses, 2 cursed demons, and these precious mushrooms. Hee, this will be delicious. And so, I could only prop myself on my chin and slowly move my head towards Glina's thigh. Why does this description sound so perverted? Okay, let's try again. I did my best to put my mouth against a certain place on a little girl's thigh. Fine, this sounds even more perverted. I might as well not say anything. When her snowy white thigh appeared right before my eyes, I was dazed for a moment. I felt like I now had an entirely new dark history. But since I had come to this point, this was no time to hesitate. If the action of me sticking my head up Glina's skirt just happened to be discovered by someone, and this action that appeared like me licking Glina's thighs was publicized, my reputation would be ruined. Roland, what are you doing? I was instantly shocked to hear this. Wasn't this Elise's voice? I brought my head out of Glina's skirt, only to see that it was my demon girlfriend indeed, but her countenance was filled with rage. I thought something terrible happened to you. I was always wondering why you suddenly took in an adopted daughter. So it turned out you were planning on committing incest with her. Boom. Okay, this sound wasn't caused by someone hitting me. Since Elisa was the one who saw me, I knew that I would at least live, but this was just far too humiliating. I didn't know how to explain my actions, so I decided to just smash my head against the wall and knock myself unconscious. When I dazedly woke up from my deep sleep, I heard Elisa and Amelia having a discussion. You think I'm making some magic medicine? Hee. Take a look. This is my recipe for magical cooking that I invented myself. See, isn't it really convenient? You don't need all sorts of complicated steps, all you have to do is add the ingredients, cook, and eat. This surgery will take a minimum of 10 hours, and I can't stop in the middle, so I need to first prepare my dinner and midnight snacks. What's that green object? It looks really disgusting. Green dragon meat, of course. Although the meat's a little tough, it's still pretty good. Is it actually delicious? Incredibly so. As long as you cook it a little, its aroma will even overflow. Would you like a taste? Poison detection. Elisa mercilessly used a poison detection spell, and to the surprise of nobody, the spell's color turned pitch black, indicating the highest, most toxic level of poison. Oh my, sorry about that. I forgot that you probably can't eat poison. To me, eating is just a habit now. Only the most poisonous ingredients seem like delicacies to me. Hey, I can live just by photosynthesis alone if I want to, and poisons are completely unable to enter my system. This soup is excellent for the skin and complexion, but I temporarily forgot that you're a fragile living creature, and I almost poisoned you to death. Sorry about that. Even though Amelia was apologizing, judging from her expression that seemed to portray that this was always only natural, she was completely insincere in her apology. Right after this, however, Elisa was unwilling to show weakness as she took a bowl of that pitch black soup and downed it in one go. Ick. Disgusting. With such cooking skills, I think I know why you haven't been able to get married. Disgusting? You dare insult my cooking skills? HMPH. It's obviously so nutritious and delicious, there must be something wrong with your taste buds. How about we find a third party to judge the taste then? What about that bastard Lolicon who just poked his head under a little girl's skirt, or that pervert who obviously woke up but is pretending to be unconscious so he can eavesdrop? What about that bastard pervert who adopted a daughter only so he could molest her? If Felix could kill, I would have died 1,000 times. Judging from Amelia's expression, which obviously indicated she wanted me to try her soup, I was likely to be forced to chug this nutritious and delicious soup that was good for the skin and complexion. I didn't have the abilities of these two to not fear any poison, and although I would probably survive in the end, who would want to undergo a full intestinal cleaning like that? Smack! And so, without any hesitation, I whacked myself in the head again, not holding back at all. At the very least, I didn't intend to wake up again until the surgery was completed. Would you like to become my adopted daughter? For someone like me who was used to taking action only after making careful plans, how could I possibly say something so casually? To be honest, I really did have some reasons for taking Gleena as my adopted daughter. I definitely can't let Gleena and Ren become Carwin's vessels anymore. I need to cut off any information leaks from them to Carwin's immediately. Even though Carwin's ended up helping us this time, his main goal was to punish Lorsai, who had broken too many rules. I had no way of knowing which side he would stand on next time. And both descendants of the Mist were obviously important. If either of them were drawn into the Chaos Abyss, it would be an irrecoverable loss. Dealing with the problem of them both being demonic descendants was an urgent matter, otherwise, there would be a constant information leakage through them, and the success of any of my plans would then likely depend on Carwin's mood. Powerful demons view their direct descendants as their personal property, and in a way this description is accurate. The summons of the bloodline is impossible to resist against, and Carwin's has a huge difference in power compared to Ren and Gleena, which can neutralize any efforts of resistance to begin with. But, that doesn't mean there isn't a way. There were quite a few demonic descendants in the mortal plane, and mages had studied them extensively. There really was a rather clever method that could cancel out an ancestor demon's control over his own descendants. For demonic descendants, there's a soul rope tied to their soul that can't be untied unless they die. And even if they die, the soul will probably be tugged into hell by this soul rope. But, we can change the person holding on to the soul rope. As long as we use a source of demonic power that's equal or greater, then there's a way to overtake the original individual controlling the soul rope. For instance, a flame demon's descendant can be injected with a demon lord's blood, and this blood transfusion can turn this person into a double demonic descendant. After that, the stronger demon lord bloodline will naturally suppress the flame demon's bloodline, which is the same thing as canceling out the flame demon's control over his descendant. After that, as long as the demon lord is killed off as well, there will be nothing to worry about anymore. I had to say, the mage who came up with this idea was a genius. This person perfectly used the nature of demonic blood where the strong would suppress the weak, but there was just a small hitch for us. I can't find any demons higher ranking than Carwin's as he's the Abyssal Prince. From a theoretical standpoint, only the Chaos Abyss itself is higher ranked than him. Even if we find a demon stronger than Carwin's, it probably still won't work. Besides, we can't deal with demons stronger than Carwin's, either. But, in a way, we still managed to discover a method that couldn't really be called a method. If we can't suppress it by force, then we can try using a roundabout method to trick the soul rope. Carwin's and I had incredibly similar soul wavelengths. If I transformed into a demon, my demonic blood should be very similar to his, and if you only looked at our ranks, my original sin demon form wouldn't be lower than the Abyssal Prince at all. And since my demonic blood was the same source as Carwin's, it could possibly even fool the soul rope into believing I was the master. After locking onto the soul rope, I would never let go again, and Gleena could be changed to become my descendant. Perhaps this would manage to cut off her connection to Carwin's. This all sounded rather complicated, and there were many theoretical problems involved, but it was actually quite simple to accomplish. I just had to activate my original sin demon form, transform into a demon of the chaos side, and then supply my blood for a blood transfusion. If everything was successful, then this special magical ritual would change Gleena from Carwin's descendant into Roland's descendant. Of course, since the two of us were twins, genetically speaking, there was no difference. In a way, when my blood would be coursing through Gleena's body, it would truly make us have a blood relationship. This was also why I abandoned all my worries and suggested that Gleena become my adopted daughter. I couldn't help but faintly smile as I watched Gleena, who was in a deep sleep beside me. Without realizing it, I suddenly have a descendant. Is this the feeling of family? Wait a moment, this scenario doesn't seem right. Why am I happy? I'm clearly still single, and I'm suddenly going to have a blood-related daughter out of nowhere, as well as a bunch of naughty children. Papa bottle was suddenly placed right next to me against my ear. The black sticky liquid within it was rather familiar. Wasn't it the good for skin and complexion soup from earlier? Amelia worked so hard to cook this. Please don't waste her efforts and drink it while it's hot. Pop. There was nothing else after the pop. Before I could even knock myself out, I was already prevented from doing so. It seemed it would no longer be possible to play the same trick 3 times in a row. Chef Amelia's face had already been stained black by the soup as well, but she was all smiles and seemed to be quite proud of her own handiwork. No need to hurry. Drink up slowly, there's plenty more in the cauldron. Does it taste good? This thick soup that tastes like a dragon and tiger fighting is something I prepared specially for you. Right at this moment, the cauldron happened to begin bubbling. A distorted skull floated up to the surface, and adding the black liquid before me, it created a scene that was disgusting to behold to the extreme. Master, the preparations for your intestinal cleaning have already been completed. Please don't make Miss Amelia wait any longer. Rest assured, after you die, I shall go ask you how it was at the river Styx. Are you already assuming that I'm going to die? I'm so unlucky. Chapter 200, Felix's Hatred. I've been single for all my life, and now I finally have a daughter to take care of me in my old age. Congratulations. Congratulations. Boom. Boom. I really wanted to say that to myself. However, I was currently standing on a street that had transformed into a sea of fire, and sounds of explosions would ring out continuously. I figured I might as well not. So much for congratulating myself. She's getting too excited and going way overboard. Should it be said that it was to be expected since Carwins and I were twin brothers? Our bloodlines didn't clash even one bit, and under Amelia's guidance, the blood transfusion was an absolute success. None of the negative reactions we were expecting occurred. Not even the normal non-magical ones like the rejection of a foreign substance common to mundane blood transfusions. A full 1/3 of the blood in Glena's body had now been replaced with my blood. And when I faintly began sensing that subtly wondrous bloodline connection, I used my willpower to directly cancel my demon form and gave Glena her freedom. After being bound by the fear of turning into a demon for so many years, Glena unhesitatingly removed her eye patch and walked out of her armor that chained herself within. Of course, it was impossible to remove the previously demonized parts, but the heterochromia one girl didn't care about the way other people looked at her. As long as the demonic eye no longer beckoned to her from the abyss, trying to tug her soul into chaos, she was quite willing to take off the eye patch and show off her youth and vitality under the sun. You're overly hyperactive. I just asked you to clean up all this rubble, not flatten everything in sight. A new city, new streets, and new plans. Since I intended on rebuilding Red Maple City into a major city, the remaining piles of rubble left behind from the battle needed to be cleared away. Originally, I had intended to invite some engineer specialists to slowly take care of this matter, but Glena, who still didn't want to return to Anshuan, volunteered for this task of her own volition. When I thought about how this could save me some money, of course I wouldn't refuse. I also took into consideration her past history, and expected that she would go overboard. But since everything was already rubble to begin with, I figured that going a little overboard wouldn't be a big deal, and it would even help her to vent her energy that's been rather excessive lately. But apparently, I had still managed to underestimate her. All the broken mechas from the battlefield became materials for Glena's explosives. Using her status as the Queen of Sluweir, she even managed to obtain the engines from the broken Roland Titans and created several explosives of frightening power, placing them into a tightly created net of explosives. And then, boom! After she pressed the red button, half of the city vanished entirely. The tremendous explosion broke every single glass window in Red Maple City. What would have taken the engineers 2 months to clear away was finished by Glena in just a single day. In a way, I had underestimated, once again, how maniacally passionate Glena was about her explosives. Fine, I admit defeat. It was better for her to vent on some rubble rather than on me. From a certain viewpoint, the surgery's success basically gave us the most solid blood connection of all. I didn't know how to deal with my adopted daughter that I now suddenly had, and Glena probably didn't know how to deal with her new father, either. Back in Anshuan, she would occasionally call me father once in a while, but mostly just as a joke, And now she hadn't called me that at all. She probably didn't even know what she should call me now. Maybe your way of expressing your feelings is rather unique, but even if you don't want to use normal hugs and act spoiled, don't you think it's a bit much to wake me up with an explosive alarm clock every morning? Waking up every morning is a race for my life, and I'll die if I'm just a little bit slow, Brett. By the way, ever since the successful surgery, I received a blessing from my system just like always. A girl not directly related to you is calling you father, but you're still an old virgin. All the conditions have been met. Congratulations for receiving the achievement. Enjoys being a daddy and the glorious title king of all backup boyfriends too. 2. If you equip this title, it will be easier for you to receive females' sympathy and male friendship. This was already pitiful enough, but the system was swift as always in pouring salt on my wounds. Actually, you can consider the next step in this achievement, gathering 7 girls as your daughters who aren't blood related to you and raising the beautiful girls well, while you still remain an old virgin. According to how well you raise them, you can receive, in order, really loves being a daddy, legendary daddy king, and veteran Mr. Mom. These 3 are the 3 major epic achievements that will reward you with the epic title You Truly Are a Nice Person. This title will aid you massively in obtaining female friendship, and at the same time make it massively more difficult in obtaining their love. Of course, if you decide to take the incest route, there's no need to hesitate. I also have titles befitting any perverted father, and I promise that they're strong. Wah! I'm no king of backup boyfriends. I don't want to become a daddy god. Even though I was mostly immune to my system's provocations after all these years, I couldn't help but helplessly kneel to the ground and have tears in my manly eyes. To add insult to injury, actually, you've already completed more than half of this achievement. Ren, Glena, Elisa, Annie, plus when you take into the consideration that your physical body won't mature anytime soon. Don't struggle, you can't resist fate. Look at it from a different angle. Becoming a legendary god is quite ferocious as well. At least, okay, the system can't find any benefits, and can't make this up anymore, so I shall simply express my sympathies and condolences to you. You have so many naughty children, it's tough being you, daddy god. I didn't even know where to start commenting from anymore, from the fact that the system itself admitted it was intentionally adding insult to injury, or from it calling me a legend daddy, or the fact that I was now so pitiful that even the system couldn't take it anymore and started expressing its sympathy. By the way, I received yet another achievement that day. You ate something highly poisonous and didn't die. Congratulations to my host for receiving the hungry enough to eat literally anything achievement. Equipping this will double the amount of food you're capable of eating, and you'll receive a minor increase to your resistance against poison and disgusting foods. This series of achievements is followed by Food God. Nothing is off limits. We eat everything with 4 legs besides tables and chairs, and the sky seems so delicious. After that is the epic achievement He Who Stands on Top of the Food Chain, and the legend titled Devourer of the Void. Actually, with Amelia by your side, you can finish this series of achievements quite quickly. There's even more? If I eat any more of those things. I really did see the river Styx last time. Those bastards even asked me you're back again? How long do you intend to stay this time? The next time I eat something from her, I really will be staying there forever. Okay, let's just forget about the past. The most important thing now was to find a certain someone for her reckoning. You've given me so much trouble. Half of the city disappeared, and as the person responsible for the project, I finally finished dealing with all those complaints, bills, and accidents caused by people frightened by the explosions. I furiously went to find Glena for her reckoning, but in the end, before I could even complain to her, I saw an unexpected battle. In an empty area, Ren and Glena were currently dueling. Sword energy was flying everywhere causing constant explosions. Judging from their actions and expressions, both of them were being serious about it. Unlike with his previous useless vessel, the Abyssal Prince had given Ren quite the gifts. The highest quality Abyssal transformation had given Ren so much power. Carwins had been worried that his vessel would randomly die off, so he directly shoved a huge amount of combat experience shoved into Ren's instinct, And that cheat-like soul imprint of hers also improved her stats all around. The current Ren would be at the top of the top even among the strongest veteran legends. Even though the Roland sacred sword was unable to simply emit sword energy everywhere, it could still slice through the air like a silver dragon. Each swing seemed like it could collapse the heavens, and the pressure from the sword combined with Ren's imposing manner allowed her to suppress her opponent's movements. To be honest, even in practice battles such as these, her seal of unlimited courage was activated and was constantly increasing her strength. After the trial of that bloody battle on the snowy night, the current Princess Knight seemed to have earned the sacred sword's recognition. She already has her own unique fighting style. It seems that she's not far from becoming someone who can take care of herself. I personally taught Ren. Although Carwin's was somewhat involved as well, her growth was only to be expected. However, Gleena, who was facing off against Ren, was truly incomprehensible. The shocking part for me was that although on the surface it seemed like Ren, who possessed the sacred sword, was controlling the situation and that Gleena had less and less room to move about and dodge, Gleena was actually the one who had control of the tempo of the battle. After Gleena took off her heavy armor, she may have been petite and dexterous, but she still had natural-born ridiculous strength. She wielded a weapon in each hand, a pike that flowed like the wind and a long sword that struck like lightning. Her two weapons didn't interfere with each other and even had cooperative techniques. It was almost as if two weapons masters were working together. Is she still just a gold rank? But suddenly, a round gnome mine dropped out from under Gleena's skirt, and its lit fuse had almost reached the end. Ren was surprised for a moment, and then she hurriedly jumped backwards, but when the fuse reached its end, nothing happened at all. Pop! The smoke coming from it was Gleena's special explosive that had only a minuscule amount of power. After she succeeded in gaining distance between them, Gleena unhesitatingly tossed down her heavy melee weapons. Now was the time for her real firepower, her guns and engineered explosives. I suddenly discovered that while Gleena may have been stuck at the gold rank, she was definitely no ordinary gold rank. Her skill in both long and short weapons had already reached master level, for a gold rank, and her engineering ability was above that of a master's. Her combined overall power was far above even a legend's. Not only that, she was also an excellent mecha pilot. She was one of the rare generalist types, good at everything. Most importantly of all, she had extraordinary combat experience. For someone like her who had been through hundreds of battles, Ren was nothing more than a fresh newbie. She could predict Ren's every move and manipulate Ren accordingly so that she could suppress her. Ren's method of attacking was far too simple and direct, while Gleena's tricks were numerous to the point where she wouldn't need to repeat a single attack during a battle. After Gleena fully understood her opponent's capabilities, she started using her true ability and instantly changed the combat situation. Under a normal situation, Gleena would definitely win, but Ren has that. In the end, Ren will still be the winner, there's no doubt about that. Maybe she noticed that I was here now, or perhaps she was suppressed to the point where she couldn't take it anymore, but as I expected, Ren finally ended up raising the sacred sword. Come here, ancient kings. Alright, I won't bother describing anything else. Some ancient king's spirits descended upon this place and Gleena was instantly knocked away by 3 waves of sword energy. The duel was over, Ren won, and Gleena was left alone, sulking. Yep, 3 waves, not 1. After that battle, the Roland sacred sword finished its god equipment's evolution. There weren't any major changes, but the limitation on summoning only 1 ancient king, 3 times a day, was modified. It can summon 4 times a day, at most 3 kings at once, and if you want to go all out, it can even summon 12 ancient king's spirits in one go. It's a little ridiculously unfair. Ren unsummoned the ancient spirits, and Gleena instantly ran to my side. Before I could even complain to her, she first reached her hand out to me. For me, I didn't know whether I should cry or laugh at this. Gleena was quite displeased at losing the duel, and felt that it was unfair how I gave the sacred sword to Ren, so now she was looking for something from me in exchange. Hey, how impatient! Blaming it on the weapon if you can't win. In that case, Ren, leave that sacred sword on the ground. Let's have a rematch. HMPH, why wouldn't I use a god equipment when I have one? If you're unsatisfied, then go ask Roland for another god equipment. Saying so, Rin laughed at her own comeback. She knew that the god equipment were incredibly rare, and she didn't believe that Roland would have another one. I do have one more, and I was planning on giving it to you, Gleena. This reply surprised the both of them as I gave a black dagger to Gleena. I give you this god equipment to protect yourself, but remember to never let anyone else find out about it. And never use it to injure a friend, or else you'll regret it. Felix's hatred, dagger, god equipment, attack, 1 to 3. Every attack is imbued with a random special effect from the following 4 effects. The dagger's blade will change color according to the effect's properties. Divine authority, ending of nature. When this effect is active, those struck will be injected with withering poison. No matter if it's an animal or a plant, even if it's just a rock, it will soon meet the end of its life. Grain colored, divine authority, distortion of life. When this effect is active, those struck will have a mysterious hormone injected into them, and will undergo a rapid transformation within a short period of time, changing their shape and species. There is a 10% chance for a beneficial transformation which will increase the original target's power, and a 30% chance for a harmful transformation which will weaken the original target's power. There is a 60% chance for a meaningless, non-important transformation. Red colored, divine authority, poison god's hatred. When this effect is active, anyone struck will be injected with a poison that has no antidote and will be sent into an eternal sleep. Black colored, divine authority, Felix's salvation. When this effect is active, an antidote will be applied on the target struck which can cancel any of the above 3 effects. This effect will not appear unless all 3 of the above effects have currently been activated. There's a row of small yellow words carved into the dagger's back. My dagger has been coated with fatal poison. Lich. Ah, it's toxic. It was a dagger of black iron that appeared perfectly ordinary on the surface, normal to the extent where even the poorest of thieves probably wouldn't give it even a second look, but it was indeed a god equipment. Felix had devoured the forest guardian god's divine power and then had perished almost immediately, and the divine power that he left behind was transformed by my system into this toxic dagger, which was the biggest prize from this battle. I already experimented with it numerous times. When the green effect of ending nature was activated, all plants would die instantly. Any animal struck by it would immediately age to middle age if it was young, and 2 strikes would age it to old age, whereas 3 strikes would kill it of old age. And the red effect of distortion was even more vicious. The random chances it had of transformation were transformations that entirely changed the species. I personally witnessed a transformed white rabbit gulp down a wild boar in a single bite. The black effect was actually the simplest. Just 1 strike caused eternal sleep. And the only antidote to all 3 of these effects, the white salvation, required at least 3 sacrifices first before it would appear, meaning it would take 3 lives to save 1, as expected of a god equipment. But what's with this attack power that's not even at the level of a fruit knife? It needs to at least be able to break the skin to inject poison into someone, so how can such a blunt knife break through anyone's defense? I tried using this dagger to gently trace across my arm, but I felt nothing at all. My titan's body directly made me immune to this insignificant damage. And if this dagger couldn't cause anyone to bleed, this god equipment would be no different from an actual fruit knife. Typically speaking, strong semi-god and god equipment would all have very bothersome side effects. Perhaps this dull blade was a type of limitation in and of itself, which was why its effects could be so powerful. But its bluntness, which wouldn't even be able to pierce through the simplest of leather armors, greatly limited the times and places where it could be used. This is useless for direct combat, but it's excellent for underhanded tactics. If it's Gleena, I believe you can make the best use of it. Gleena nodded continuously as she received the god equipment dagger, and her icy little expression finally showed a hint of a smile. That momentary smile was especially cute, but in the next moment, she started showing off to Ren, as if she had won something important. But now wasn't the time to be idling, relaxing and wasting time, as I had something more important to do. Let's make our preparations. The disaster relief squad has already gathered. We're going to the elves. Note: 1. Heterochromia is a difference in coloration, usually of the iris of the eye, but it can also be of hair or skin. 2. A backup boyfriend, in Asian culture, is when a girl has a boyfriend but keeps ambiguous relationships with other men, just in case.